canvassers. Oh, okay, Jerry, please start the recording. I won't hear when he starts the recording.
No.
Okay, I think he just started it. So it's 3 o'clock. I'm calling the Board of Canvassers to order. All 7 members of the Board of Canvassers are here, and I call on Boris.
Thank you. The staff would like to present 5 untimely ballots to the Board of Canvassers for review and rejection. We have received 3 domestic ballots. All 3 were late mailed, late received. And we received 2 Yokawa ballots. One of them is late mailed, late received, and the other one was timely mailed but late received.
So the one that is timely mailed but late received was an overseas
Yeah,
ballot?
it was overseas. So total is 5 ballots, obviously, very well after the election day.
Okay, is there a motion?
I move that we reject these ballots based on untimely receipt.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Moved by Ami, seconded by Diane. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hands. It is unanimous. Okay, we are done with the Board of Canvassers meeting for today. So I now call the Board of Elections meeting to order. Once again, we have not only a quorum present, we have the entire membership present. Thank you all for being here. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. For anyone who is in the room, I have brought cookies from Sunflower Bakery. They're on the table over there. Everyone should feel free to celebrate. I did say at our last meeting that I was not going to be bringing green beer, and I have lived up to that. I did not bring green beer for this meeting, but if you all are interested, we do have those cookies, including the ones that are in the bag have gluten. The ones that are in the container next to it are gluten-free. So everybody should be able to get some if they'd like it. Second, I would like to offer triple congratulations to board member Margie Delao. I think since we last met, 3 great things have happened for her, and I'm going to take them one by one so that each one can be recognized. The first is that she got engaged.
Oh, good. Best wishes.
The second is that she's gotten into graduate school in multiple places. And the third is that she had a milestone birthday and turned 21. Oh, I mean 30. So
you could have brought the beer.
Margie, I think, is perhaps our youngest board member ever, but she's not that young. So, so anyway, so thank you for. She didn't quite just turn 21. She's at least 22.
Although she looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to do, since I'm in the congratulatory mood, is I wanted to point out that our attorney Kevin Karpinski is joining us remotely today. But I'd like to congratulate him because earlier this month at a ceremony in Hawaii, he was inducted as a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers. Wow. And the American College of Trial Lawyers, for those of you who don't know, is an invitation-only nonpartisan fellowship of exceptional trial lawyers from the United States and Canada who have demonstrated the very highest standards of trial advocacy, ethical conduct, integrity, professionalism, and collegiality, all of which sounds like our attorney, Kevin. As you guys know, our board never looks for litigation, but we're glad if any of his work for us helped him get this this high honor. And we also know, those of us in the legal profession in particular know that not every litigator is good at giving advice, and not every person who is a good advisor is good at litigation. And we're very fortunate that Kevin is a star at both. So congratulations.
Thank you, David.
Okay, just a couple of other things before we move on. On March 10th, Daniel, Ami, and I attended a meeting sponsored by the Maryland Association of Election Officials of members of local boards of elections from across the state. And it was an interesting exchange of information and ideas, and I'll save some of the specifics for another day because it covered a variety of topics, but I wanted to share one item of interest that I think all of us will see as a sense of how the state can be very different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We were talking about how each board handles public comment. And the president of one local board in a small Western Maryland county said that while his board occasionally has had visitors for their ballot canvases, they have not had a visitor at a regular board meeting in 14 years. By contrast, I can't remember a public meeting we've had in my 14 years on this board where we didn't have a visitor. So I thought that was very interesting. I'll have some more comments when we get to it in the agenda about ranked choice voting, but I wanted to say that I'm really excited about the bipartisan group of 5 ranked choice voting experts who are scheduled to present to us today. We'll try to get through as much of our agenda as we can before that discussion. Then when all of the presenters are here, we will move to that discussion, and then we will have our regular public comment period after that discussion. And then we'll return to whatever's left in our agenda after that. And then I also, again, like to thank all the board members for being here in person and for continuing our learning experience with the OWL. This is now our second OWL meeting. You know, apparently it focuses on whoever is speaking and apparently on some other people as well. I haven't quite figured out how that does that yet, but I do think that if you even whisper or eat something that makes the slightest bit of noise, that the camera may be on you and the microphone may find you too. So I just wanted to remind everybody of that fact. That probably is true in the audience as well. Anyway, everyone is forewarned. Are there any other remarks that board members want to make at this point? Okay, seeing none. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Okay, disclosure of campaign contributions or attendance at fundraisers. Does anybody have anything to disclose? Okay, I see no one has anything to disclose. So now we're on to the election director's report for us.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. As usual, this director's report and all the materials presented to the board today are available on our website under the March meeting of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. The agenda was shared with the board and general public a week ahead of the board meeting last Monday. And all the materials were shared again with the board and posted last Thursday for anyone who wanted to see. In my report, there are 3 action items from February board meeting. The links are provided for the DOJ, Department of Justice, communication regarding web accessibility updates and the efforts that Montgomery County government and Board of Elections are undertaking that aspect. The second action item was David's request in regards to ballot marking device usage across 3 polling places at the Leisure World. And the third one was total number of untimely rejected ballots by the board since the certification of the election results. So all 3 action items are presented in the report.
Before you move on, Boris, so the 149 untimely ballots since certification is now 154.
That's correct.
After today.
We didn't count these 5 because they were not presented to the board at the time the report was prepared.
Right, understood. Okay.
So we will keep adding.
154 and counting.
That's the
Yes.
line, yeah. So voter registration statistics, every month we prepare monthly statistical report update, again, available on our website. Our count of registered active voters is around 700,000, going steady for like last few months, with the distribution across the parties presented in report itself. One note from the State Board of Elections that Working Class Party had a petition to become a recognized party in the state of Maryland. Petition was successful because they collected over 10,000 signatures that were verified across local boards of elections in the state. Basically, they are a recognized party in Maryland again. When it comes to the personnel, we have published a vacancy ad for the nursing home and vote by mail canvassing specialist. We expect hiring in April. while the manager for the recruitment, training and outreach will hopefully go into advertisement end of this week or early next week. When it comes to budget is shared, budget overview tracking document is shared with the board, available on our site. No major changes compared to the last month, as we are out of the election season. We are paying all the bills to the state and all the vendors that we have to cover for the last elections. There's one note here that the state administrator mentioned at last state board meeting that anticipated costs of the new voting system might go up between 20 and 50% based on the new standards introduced by the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. So this is something that's still in works. We don't have any figures. We don't have any number. Once the state has it, we will have it as well to see what kind of impact it will have on our budget in the next fiscal year.
Do you have any information as to what they did that increased the cost that much?
I don't. I know that Jared had a meeting with the representative of a group of companies that produce voting systems. So new standards obviously trigger new requirements. Introduction of those requirements is bringing up the cost of the system. That's an estimate. So no bidding, no procurement, it has been initiated. So
Alex,
Boris, when you meant new voting system, is that a reference to the poll books or is it something broader than that?
we are talking about, state has a plan in 2028 to have new scanners, new BMDs. That's the system they are looking. Of course, the poll books are on the agenda as well to be purchased.
okay, thank you. If I remember the state of play for 26, everything remains the same for 26, including the poll books?
Everything remains the same. I do not see how procurement and integration and testing could be completed before 26.
Right.
And I think that Jared was quite clear that 28 is the goal.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? Okay, go ahead, Boris.
Okay, I'll just go very briefly through the through the sections, activities, water services. As after every election, this is focuses on list maintenance activities of all the backlog materials that were received while the voter registration was closed, all bounced mail, return mail that we need to process, while we are still receiving our regular data sets from Eric, from courts, from the office of DHMH for the deceased individuals and the like. We had around 30,000 electronic records that we processed since the last time. We also reaching out to municipalities to see which one of them will have elections this year, to see what kind of assistance they will need from us. When I say assistance, usually we provide them with the voter registration lists and precinct registers. But they have to tell us what's their cutoff date because they run their own elections. We have no authority over them. They set their own voter registration deadlines and similar.
And just to be clear for the record, for those municipalities that include either underage or non-citizen voters, they do that on their own. That's not on our voter registration information.
We have some of those municipalities. These are supplemental lists that they run.
Okay.
Anyone who is on our list meets the voter registration requirement. U.S. citizen 18, 16 or plus U.S. citizen resident of the state of Maryland, resident of the county. So anything else that municipalities do, again, they implement their elections based on their own charter. They don't follow the election law. We have no jurisdiction over any activities that they do.
Okay, thank you.
Candidate filing, of course, started in February. It will last until February next year. There are already 13 candidates that filed to appear on our ballot. 6 candidates filed with us, 7 candidates filed with the state. County offices are filed here. Anyone that is filing to run for the office that is at the General Assembly or a state office files with the State Board of Elections. So 13 is the number as it was last Thursday. I believe it's 14 now. Right. Now it's 14.
If somebody files for federal office, that's in Annapolis?
That's an app.
Okay.
So state and federal is a State Board of Elections, county offices is here. We are talking county council, executive sheriff, courthouse and everything, and of course, central committees of both parties. IT section, we are still we are doing post-election maintenance on the voting equipment, scanners and ballot marking devices. Poll books project has been completed. Our work with our colleagues from TEBS, Technology and Enterprise Business Solutions, is not completed yet on the election resource management system, but we are getting into the last stages, and we believe the testing of the new system will start soon. Again, as I mentioned in the very opening, updating of our website to make it accessible based on DOJ guidelines is ongoing process, not only for our agency, but for every agency in the county. When it comes to the operations section, supplies and shredding, that's the part of the work for that for our colleagues, that team for this time of the year. Recruitment never stops, just like outreach never stops. We are tracking everyone who registered to vote or update their voter registration and check that little box that they're interested to see if they could serve. We are following up with those individuals. We sent almost 1,800 cards to those individuals since the last time. Of course, we are always looking in the post-election season in our internal processes and procedures. What could we do differently? What was the feedback that we got? So that's the part of our work now. Recruitment section works closely with outreach. They are covering outreach events. Again, Montgomery County is kind of outlier for the state because we never stop with outreach. So outreach is always, it's ongoing. And the same goes with the lead trainer. When it comes to meetings and events, biennial for the board members, May 4th and 5th. Mayor annual conference for all the mayor members is May 6th to 9th. These are the last two items in my report.
Okay, and I would just add to the mail report that if you did not respond to the emails earlier, the assumption is that you will be at the biennial and that you will not be at the remainder of the conference. And if anybody wants to change that in any way, in part or in full, then you should reach back out. But otherwise, that's the assumption that we are operating under. Are there any questions for Boris about anything in his report? Wow, we are a quiet group today. Okay, I'm sorry?
I know about full agenda.
Well, I don't think it's as full as you think it is, but that's okay. But I'm happy to move on to the next item. The next item is the 2024 general election report of the manual audit. And Boris, I turn it over to you.
So we are required after each election to conduct a manual audit of a sample of cast ballots. That audit, there's a time frame. We completed the manual audit on February 18th. There are 4 sets of ballots that are being that are subject to the manual audit. There's a random selection of early voting center and election day polling places that's done by the State Board of Elections. They literally tell us which early voting center, how many scanners, how many ballots from each. Same goes for the polling places. And the staff randomly selects a vote by mail and provisional ballots. So this time we had to do the manual count of 1,875 ballots that were cast at Silver Spring Early Voting Center, 1,884 ballots cast on election day at 3 polling precincts, 04, 19, 724, and 710, 3,499 mail-in ballots, and 150 provisional ballots. We completed the manual audit in 1 day, and our manual count compared to the system count was showed a difference of 1 ballot. And we identified that ballot, it's a voter who marked the ballot at the polling place instead of filling out the oval, put the check mark that went around the oval without crossing oval at any point. Which means on the hand count, it's a vote for Alsobrooks. On the polling place for the scanner, it's a blank vote. No selection was made.
So our scanning equipment is very precise, only looks inside the circle.
It only looked inside the circle, and just for the board, I wanted to just to show it. It's literally, I don't know how the person managed to do it literally there is no instance where the ink is crossing the office. So
Fan of both.
on the hand count, we know it's a count for this candidate. For the machine, it's a blank because there's
Thank
nothing.
you for not making us meet to decide that.
That's, no, it's, I just, again,
Wasn't it Canvas then?
no, this was, I think.
This went to the machine.
Just a -1. I think it's the early voting.
It was early voting.
Yeah, it was an in-person vote.
Easy.
Yeah, it really doesn't, does it?
It's a,
So much for my.
easy
fiancé
call.
method.
again, for us, we went through the count was off, we went back to identify, to narrow potential, and this is the one that is.
So I just want to point out that what this means is that it is possible, highly unlikely, but possible for the machine not to count what the board, I think, would unanimously agree is a vote.
Absolutely.
So something for us to just keep in mind, in terms of relying on the machine. The machine is very specific to its task and, which is not necessarily the voter's intent.
In summary, the staff completed manual audit timely. The manual audit confirmed the accuracy of the voting system count of the ballots cast. Discrepancy is one, and I believe very explainable and very obvious. But that would be,
But that's another case of the voter not following the instruction.
the sad part here, the voter voted the rest of the ballot, but in other instances, the check mark went through the.
But they use check marks throughout the
Throughout
ballot
the whole ballot.
where the instructions are to fill in the circles. And of course, we have lots of voters who do that.
Yeah,
That's-
Check marks, X's, you name it. So,
Yeah, X is maybe what the machine would have picked, but there is this check mark
Right,
that goes
right.
around.
understood, but,
Hey,
yeah. Okay, any other, questions or comments about the audit? Okay, the next is the attorney's report. Now, do I need to unmute my computer or will it come up there? Okay, Kevin? We'll call on
Okay.
you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I just have two things to report. David sent you a copy of the court's opinion of Sullivan versus State Board of Elections. This was a case where Catherine Sullivan and David Morsberger filed suit against the state for a violation of.
Kevin, can you hang on for a minute? Kevin,
Kevin,
hang on for a minute.
We're gonna mute the TV.
So mute the TV and I'm gonna turn it on my computer. Okay, Kevin, please start over.
Okay. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was the court's opinion in the Sullivan versus State Board of Elections case. And this was a suit that was filed against the state board alleging a violation of Section 8 of the National Voter Registration Act. And it was a challenge to a COMAR provision that was instituted 33.03.02.01B parentheses 1 and parentheses, which purports to exclude investigations from the definition of the electoral process in terms of being able to get voter registration list. As the board is well aware, we have groups that have been going through voter registration lists and making suggestions about individuals who may or should be removed. The court, Judge Maddox in the United States District Court for the District of Maryland, found that the COMAR provision did in fact violate the National Voter Registration Act, and that the section is invalid because it is preempted by federal law. I don't know if Boris has heard anything about it. I don't think the state is intending to appeal this to the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, but I wasn't able to get a hold of Dan Coburn to go ahead and talk about that. But the decision is hardly surprising. This is a follow-up to Judicial Watch versus Linda Lamone, where Judge Hollander many years ago made a very similar finding in terms of preemption under the National Voter Registration Act. So I suspect what will happen is, and Boris, correct me if I'm wrong, the state is going to have to modify their form to make it such that you're not submitting an affidavit that says that you will not use voter registration materials to do any sort of investigations. Is that correct?
Sorry, it is correct. We already received the updated form from the state and we updated initial set of our documents on Friday. So we're on the target on that one.
Okay. So that case is out there and I suspect that will just, that'll run its course. The other is that I'm working with Boris and Janet and Mindy and other staff already on the MOUs for 2026. We would like to go ahead and start getting those finalized so that we can begin the circulation process as soon as the board has made decisions on early voting locations, drop boxes, those kinds of things, so we can get those agreements in place. And
do we also, I'm sorry, do we also have MOUs for private polling places as election day polling places as well?
we do, we have lease agreements with them, which will be updated. And unless anyone has any questions, that's all I have to report. I can't hear you, David.
Okay.
So Kevin, I'll ask you another time how Hawaii was. But that would be my one question for you, but we'll keep that for another time. Oh, Daniel has a question. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Daniel.
Hi, Kevin. Not sure if I can recall if it was the general election or the primary election. I think we had to make a switch at one of the polling stations. Is that correct? And are we going back to that same polling station or?
So I don't know.
Are we talking about the one off of New Hampshire Avenue?
There will be, so
Yeah.
in preparation of the list of polling places for 2026, we are looking at if we can go back to original polling place, if the building is completed, for example, in the case of schools, or if there are any new constructions that will kind of relocate us from polling place that was used in 2024. So that list of proposed changes or mandated changes, because if there is no school, if it's been demolished, we have to move out. Will be part of the packet that will be presented to the board when the board sits to decide on the list of polling places for 2026. I know, David, if you want to speak about.
Yeah, as I recall, and Boris, remind me if I have it right. We have the April, May, and June meetings coming up, and I believe that April is drop boxes, May is election day polling places, and June is early voting sites. Now, the default is that we go back to the places that we were before in all three categories. If there's a reason not to, either because something was under construction before and the construction is over and we return, or something is now going to be under construction that wasn't before, or if you all have a reason that you think that some other location should change, let's talk about it offline before we get to those meetings so that any evaluation needs to be done can be done. But I know that in general, our board has not believed in just changing for its own sake. And so I think that that's kind of where we're starting from. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so there's a board's approach, as David rightly indicated, the continuity of service, keeping locations in the same places that voters are familiar with. There's a legal requirement for us to stay with the same number of polling places as we had in 2018, which is 232. So we are kind of in bind when it comes to the total number. But thinking,
I think that's in the process of being amended.
it is a process to being amended for the first election post census. And our number of first election poll says it was
Well,
232.
right, I understand.
So it
but
was
I'm
the
just saying,
same.
all I'm saying is that we're gradually making our way into the 2020s. You know.
We are
so,
getting
yeah,
there.
you know, so.
But it will be part of the packet. We are looking at every polling place that needs to be looked at. It will be presented in May. Which will give us plenty of time for any changes, for any, God forbid,
Yes.
collapse roofs or something like that.
Indeed, God forbid. Well, no, I just brought that up because I want to make sure we have enough time to inform the public, but also make sure we're able to engage the community as.
Yeah, there is a legal requirement on the staff to send, to notify via email a list of individuals every time the board is considering to change polling place.
Mhm.
Last time I checked, our list has around 160 names on it. It includes every elected official from the municipal council to the delegates, plus anyone who ever expressed interest to receive that communication from us. So
Thank you, Boris.
everyone will be notified 2 weeks prior to the board meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, anything for Kevin? Okay, then, I'm gonna wait a little bit. We have one of our speakers is just out of the room at the moment for the ranked choice voting. Let's talk about, let's start the conversation about the General Assembly session and, we can come back to that. My big thing to report is that, as you may recall, there are two bills that we are essentially the main impetus behind. One of them is to move the gubernatorial primary election 1 week earlier in years where there are 5 Tuesdays in the month of June, including 2026. And that bill has separately, and I say separately because the House passed the House version of the bill and the Senate passed the Senate version of the bill today. The versions are the same, but because they are sponsored differently, I think they still have to approve each other's. Yeah, right. Usually what they end up doing, and I find this to be an interesting thing that the state of Maryland does, is that they'll approve them both and the governor will sign them both, and then both of them will say, I got this bill passed. But whatever the case, so the outlook is good for that. It's not done yet, but the outlook is good for that. It was a bipartisan vote in both houses of the legislature. And the second one, which is the provisional ballot bill, the one that says that if you voted the wrong party ballot in our closed primary state, and you got a provisional ballot, and we didn't let you vote in the party primary that you said you wanted to be in, but you're not registered in, you're the one that would say your nonpartisan Board of Education vote would still count. That bill is in the same circumstance. Both passed each house, separate versions, but the same version. To my knowledge, there is not a difference between them. And the Senate passed both of those bills today. The House passed both of those bills. I think it might have been over the weekend, but it was relatively recently that the House passed both of those bills. So there's a reasonable chance for both of those bills. Obviously, there's 3 weeks left in the session, and we all know that things can happen. Now, given that everybody is here for the ranked choice voting conversation, I'm going to suggest that we pick up whatever else there is to the General Assembly conversation when we come back. I'm not sure if there is anything else for the
I
General
just
Assembly.
wanted to say that you
Yeah.
covered it all. Today is a crossover day.
Yes, today's the crossover day. What that means is that if it doesn't get out of one house today, the other house does not promise it a hearing. So it's not that it's impossible for something to pass if it doesn't get out today, but it's much more difficult. So our legislators are hard at work today and probably will be hard at work tonight to work on a whole bunch of bills, to get that done. And then they are kind of in the home stretch the last 3 weeks of the legislative session. Boris, as a matter of completeness, gives us a chart of every election bill in the legislature. And I would, let's just say that I would suggest that if you have specific ones that you are interested in, you can bring them up later in the meeting, but you also can just ask about them outside of the meeting. I've been following these things fairly closely. But not necessarily, you know, every single one, especially the ones that don't affect us directly. For example, I will mention this one, that you guys may be familiar with the bill that Senator Kagan and Delegate Corman have introduced that would require all local boards of elections in Maryland to live stream their board meetings and their canvasses. And that is on its path to passing out of the Senate without the canvases. The rest of the state thinks that that live streaming canvas is too hard. And of course, we already do that and have no plans to change that. And of course, we are live streaming right now. So our board meeting, so that bill doesn't really affect us in the sense that we already do what that bill would require us to do. But I have been following that one because it happened to be heard on the same day that our other bills were heard. Any other questions, Ami?
Comment. I just want to comment that I appreciate your testimony. And I appreciate your sending drafts of it around for us all to look at before you present it. And I think you did an excellent job on all pieces of
Well,
it.
thank you. That's very kind. I appreciate that everybody is reading it and responding in a short time frame, which is unfortunately the way it seems to be. But I do appreciate that. I'll mention one other, which is we had the bill that we voted on, which is to support requiring judges in order to get paid for training to serve at the polls, and to allow students to get SSL hours in addition to pay. That was in one bill. And as I understand it, at least on the Senate side, on the House side, I believe they passed it as introduced. And on the Senate side, they took out the provision relating to the students. So I don't know how that will get resolved in terms of whether the students will be able to do both or not. But at least at the moment, that's the state of that particular bill. That wasn't one that we proposed, but that was one that we endorsed.
Yeah.
So anyway, okay. Any other questions on legislation? Okay,
You're good.
let the record show that I got one additional item in before this conversation. So anyway, okay, so I'm gonna ask our guests to all come to the table together, if you don't mind.
Just give us a second to
Yeah,
open the
yeah,
space for you.
Yeah, we're gonna give Boris and Lisa a second. We have 5 chairs over here, and we have 5 of you. And I want to thank all of you for being here and for being here in person. And I'm going to introduce you guys.
Actually, it doesn't pick, I'll pick some, so you can see.
Boris, you probably, do you want your computer, Boris?
We need it because of the owl.
Oh, the owl is attached to it. Ah, got it. So should we push it more towards the middle of the table?
So still have not broken anything.
Okay,
David, while they're getting settled,
yes.
I'd love it if one of these meetings, we had a brief technical discussion on how the.
That would require us to know. I hope that it will be less challenging than putting together a panel on ranked choice voting. I'll put it that way. I consider the results to be excellent, but there were challenges. But yes, I think that's a great idea. If for no other reason, then I keep reminding everybody that, you know, your every little move is being recorded. So I want to make sure that we cover that. So I seem to have lost one of my pieces of paper. Here we go. Oh, yes. Okay, great. So thank you all for being here. Actually, what I think we should start with is, I think that all of us should, meaning board members, should introduce ourselves, because we really do want to have a conversation with you all. And then I'm gonna have a few opening remarks, then I'm gonna call on each of you. I'm gonna ask you to kind of stick to time limits. You're certainly not required to use all the time we've given you. But we do want to keep it within time limits. And then we're gonna have, each board member will get 5 minutes for questions. So I suppose it's obvious at this point, but I'm David Naiman. I'm the president of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. Why don't we go this way and then go this way?
Okay, my name is Ami Hover, and I am the secretary of this Board of Elections. And I want to say I appreciate this because it is not our decision to make on whether there is or is not ranked-based voting imposed on our processes. But I'm concerned about the implications for what it does in our daily, weekly, and every election cycle activities. And that's the part that I am most concerned about, and I hope we get to address that.
And when I get to my statement, it's going to sound very similar to that. Diane.
Diane Dillon, welcome, everybody. Thank you. It's a very interesting topic. I'm looking forward to hearing everything. Thank you.
Alex.
Alexander Vincent, I'm a substitute board member. I certainly agree with my colleague, Mrs. Hober, that one of the things that doesn't get explored very often is the impact on the administration of elections. How voters think about it, how it might or might not confuse them into those kind of things. So certainly looking forward to what you all say on those issues.
And before I move on, I'm going to say that for those of you who aren't familiar with how the Montgomery County Board works, a substitute board member is a board member who sits with us, makes motions, helps count votes, is a member of the Board of Canvassers, but when it comes to the board, they only vote if someone else is unavailable. Now, if one of us goes to the restroom, the substitute member can vote while we're out of the room. And quite frankly, one of my legislative priorities for next year is to make all of our substitute board members regular board members, because at the moment, Montgomery and Prince George's counties are the only counties in Maryland left that have substitute board members. But in any event, we are very happy that we have excellent substitute board members who come to all our meetings, participate, et cetera. And they are, in every way, they are full board members, except for that small portion that the law prevents them from being. Okay, David.
Yep, and I obviously agree with David, our board president, in terms of the great work that our colleagues do. I'm Daniel Karoma, I'm the vice president of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. This is a very interesting topic, one that is not so strange to some of us because we have local jurisdiction that actually, participate in ranked choice voting. I'm happy to see, obviously, a familiar face, Michelle. But it's also good to, what I would really like to get from this conversation is to dispel the myths about it. So whereby it doesn't become a partisan conversation, but it's more, because there's something about, I believe, the administration of election that we put our partisanship aside and try to do the right thing, because it's not about, us here, on the board. It's really about the voters, and I believe that's who we're here to serve. So thank you so much for coming.
Keaton.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kinamia. As my colleagues have shared, this is going to be an interesting conversation, and I'm looking for fact-finding opportunity while talking with you all, particularly to the point of civic engagements. That's my background, and it's very important to me that people feel that they still have and will continue to have a sense of ownership around their choices. I think it's very much going to be the meat of this conversation for obvious reasons. So I'm very much excited to hear from all of you.
I'm Margie Delao. I am the substitute board member of the Montgomery County Board of Elections. Thank you all for coming today. This is a very important topic, and I really look forward to hearing each one of you have to say about it. So thank you so much.
So I was prepared to say a little bit about each of you. and then when you guys speak, please tell us anything more that you think we should know. I'm thrilled that you're here. Before I get to that, let me just say that, I didn't intentionally schedule ranked choice voting for a discussion on St. Patrick's Day. But I will say that it is appropriate in that Ireland has had ranked choice voting for 100 years.
Good point.
And they have a system called single transferable vote. You guys may know what single transferable vote is, but I'm guessing that my side of the table doesn't have, other than myself, doesn't have much knowledge about it. But let's just say that it is more complicated than the ranked choice voting that most American jurisdictions use now. And that I had the joy of administering college student government elections under single transferable vote in the 1980s. So I did it without a computer. I did it with a calculator, a pen and paper. You know, I think I lost all my hair while I was doing it.
But it
So
was nonetheless a joy.
yeah, nonetheless a joy. Well, it was, it was very interesting to say, to say the least. So whatever, the state has legislation pending that would allow the county to institute ranked choice voting for county offices, and whatever they decide, I can assure everyone that we will not be administering this election the way I did in the 1980s. So, while ranked choice voting is not new, it's gotten more publicity in recent years. It's been adopted in more places and banned in other places. I'm not someone who believes that ranked choice voting cures cancer, nor am I someone who believes that ranked choice voting is cancer. And our board, neither our board nor I have taken a position, although I would suspect that if we ask people their individual positions, which I am not, that we'd have a spirited conversation. But I do want to share an interesting fact. In preparation for this meeting, I did a fair amount of reading, a fair amount of talking to people. And one of the people that I spoke with is the city clerk in Tacoma Park. And Tacoma Park has had ranked choice voting since 2007. So, we're, I guess, 18 years. She said a number of things that were of interest, but one of them was that in all the years that Tacoma Park has had ranked choice voting, the leading candidate in first choice votes has always won the election. Like literally every single time. So that means they would have won under the traditional system, and they would have won under ranked choice voting. And perhaps one or more of you can tell us if that is common elsewhere. I know that we hear about the examples where it doesn't happen that way. But I'm curious as to whether that is a common a common result. As Ami said, and I wholeheartedly agree with, our purpose today, we're not trying to influence legislation. We don't decide what happens on this issue. The purpose is for us to all be better educated about how ranked choice voting works in practice, what some of the operational issues are or may be, and what would be required of us for it to work smoothly if we are called upon to implement it. I have no information that we will or won't. But that's kind of what I had in mind. And I'm really excited that you're all here. And thank you for doing that, and thank you for being here in person. So what I was going to do, I'm going to say a little bit about each of you in the order that I'm hoping you're going to speak, and then we'll let you guys do your thing. And I am going to set my timer so that so that my board members don't say, wait a second, you gave them, less time, more time, et cetera. If I learn how. So anyway, okay. So I'm going to ask Michelle Whitaker to go first. Michelle is the Executive Director of Ranked Choice Voting Maryland. To those of us who are active locally, Michelle is also known to us as the former Chief of Staff for Councilmember Will Jawando. and as a member of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee. She's a current member of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, although today, my understanding is she's not speaking for either.
Correct.
So anyway. Then we have Josh Daniels, who is the former Utah County Clerk Auditor. Utah County being where Provo is located, and Brigham Young University, and et cetera. He was the Chief Elections Officer there. He was a local GOP official before that and served in the Marine Corps. Thank you for your service in the Marines. Thank you for your service as an election official, and thank you for coming here today.
Thanks for having me.
Then Ryan Kirby, who is the Director of Public Policy at the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. Now, I met Ryan when he was the Chief of Staff for the state senator from Rockville and Gaithersburg, who in this room needs no introduction, but that's Cheryl Kagan. We appreciate your service both to the state and, and for being here. And then Caleb Hayes, who is the Chief Policy Counsel for the Center for Election Confidence. He has his own law practice called Section 4 Strategies, Section 4 being a section of the Constitution of the United States. In case.
Did you read it?
I'm sorry.
I said you did.
I did. I did. If I told you how much I read for this, you would, well, let's just say you'd know that I'm a retired federal employee. So anyway, among other things, Caleb spent several years working in various election-related capacities for the House Committee on House Administration, which is the committee of jurisdiction in the House of Representatives over election issues. Always on the Republican side, sometimes in the majority, sometimes in the minority, which is, of course, how that works. And I found the Center for Election Confidence because they testified in Annapolis against ranked choice voting related legislation and got connected to them that way. And last but not least is Walter Olson, who's a senior fellow at the Cato Institute's Robert A. Levy Center for Constitutional Studies. In Maryland, Walter is known for having been the co-chair of the Maryland Citizens Redistricting Commission, which was created and appointed by former Governor Hogan in 2021. We will not get into that today, for all of our sake, or at least not until the meeting's over. I found him because he and the executive director of the Center for Election Confidence participated in a Federalist Society program that I found online called Does Ranked Choice Voting Help or Hurt? You can, the program is available to anyone who Googles it. There's a transcript if you'd rather read it. It just happened that when I Googled Mr. Olson, I discovered that he knew our board secretary, which I guess is not surprising given that he lives in what is the 6th Congressional District, and Ami was the Republican nominee for Congress in the 6th Congressional District twice. So anyway, I was glad to have that nice coincidence and happy to have you here. I would add that when we reached out to Mr. Olson, we did not know what his position was on ranked choice voting. And I'll let him speak for himself when the time comes. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Michelle, and please proceed. And I'm going to ask board members, we're going to hold our questions until they all get a chance to speak. Okay, go ahead.
So very glad to be with all of you, and thank you for this opportunity. As David mentioned, I'm the executive director for Ranked Choice Voting Maryland. We're a nonpartisan organization that works at the grassroots level to really help to inform and advise community members as well as policymakers and decision makers about ranked choice voting and how to improve their elections with using ranked choice voting. We do advocate for different pieces of legislation or action at either the local, county, or the state level to move bills forward that help to implement it, adopt it, and work on any other strategies that the jurisdiction that is looking into would like to have our support with. So that includes us doing education work, as well as doing a lot of just community engagement, which we do. We're out all over the county, very active, or sorry, all over the state, but we're also active here in the county doing work to do meetings, meet with different groups, individual groups, as well as official groups and bodies that are interested in knowing more. So that's a little bit about my background, but I also like to share that, you know, along with being a county resident, I am a mom. I have a daughter who's in the public school system. I have two parents who are aging and I take care of them. I'm also a former rugby player and a current referee. And so I go to lots of our parks around the state to do games. And, you know, all of those pieces of me are what I bring to when I go and vote. And that's what I know a lot of you do as well. When you go into the ballot box, you're bringing your whole self and you're making decisions and you're prioritizing based on how do these policies, how do these individuals impact me individually, impact my family, impact my community, and those priorities that I have. When we vote, and the way that we vote right now in many of our elections, that you're voting for one, sometimes it really limits you in terms of really expressing fully who you support or the candidates that you're most interested in because those values align with your priorities. And that's where ranked choice voting can come into play. So before I go into any further, I think we haven't really named what ranked choice voting is and how it works. So take a quick moment to say that in ranked choice voting, the basic principle for on the voter side is that you have the option to rank your candidates in order of preference, first choice, second choice, third choice, so on your ballot. That's it. That's what you do. You go in the ballot and you can rank as many or as few candidates as you like. That's how the instructions are given almost universally in all of the jurisdictions that are using it. And the voters tend to understand that. And I'm sure that some of my other colleagues will be able to share some of the data behind voter education and their understanding of marking ballots. But that's the part that happens with voters. And it's easy for them to think through the process of who's my first choice, who's my top choice in this candidate, who's my backup, and then who might my further backup be in that election. The other part of it is where you all come into play in terms of the administration and counting and tabulating the results. And so that's where you take all of the first choices. And as David was mentioning, if you have in the first round, if you count all the first choices and someone gets a majority, they win just in like any other election and you're done. If no one reaches that majority threshold, that's when you look at the candidate who's in least place, so has the fewest votes. They're eliminated, but you as the voter, if that was your top choice, you now have your next choice considered. So one of the benefits of ranked choice voting is that voters have more power, more of a voice in the election. So it's not just their first choice that matters. It can be their second choice if their top candidate is someone who's not likely to win, but is someone who really represents their values, the priorities that they have as an individual. So that's the first part of it. You do the tallies round by round until you have the result of someone coming out with that majority winner piece. I did share a link, David. I don't know if you have that or.
I do, Boris.
Let's see how the technology works.
Technology
demo-
works, I
yeah.
don't.
Click on the demo first. You all we'll do this another time if you want to, but this is an online tool that we use to give examples of how ranked choice voting and do it with individuals and many community groups. So this is a simple one where hopefully this is a non-controversial one of what's your favorite drink and your beverage, latte, tea, coffee.
I want to
chocolate.
write in your ear.
You want to write? You want to write? Oh, is it not sharing?
I'm gonna share the screen on Zoom.
Oh, okay. 1 second.
Our CV works through write-ins. It'd be real with them.
You can do write-ins. We don't do that on the app version of it here that we're doing, but yeah.
Actually, if it doesn't work there, I might be able to do it.
Okay.
Oh, nope, there we go.
Great. So you're able to mark your ballot, and Josh, do you want to just mark kind of
Sure.
your options here of like, what's your top choice?
Clearly, it's a latte.
There you go. And then your next choice is
Good old classic
classic
coffee.
coffee.
Tea. We
Chocolate.
threw tea in the harbor, so we'll go with chocolate,
Chocolate.
water, and the Queen's English will have to fall to the wayside.
Now, one thing that is, if Josh was really like, I don't like tea at all, and I don't want to vote for tea, as I said before, you don't have to, you rank as many or as few as you want. So if tea is really not an option that he wants to rank, he can only rank 4. He's not required to rank all 5 in this example either. And then if you just hit the submit button, we'll submit that. Your results are in there and click on preliminary results. And this shows based on this, if you just go back up to the top real quick.
Someone's been stuffing the ballot box.
No, we use this very often. So we have 143 votes and it takes 72 votes to win. Coffee is the winner. It's showing you because it's done the calculation in this option. And down here, this visualization shows you how we got there. So in round one, oops, oh, go back, yep. In round one, coffee has the lead with 37, but is not at the threshold, which is the 74 to have a majority, to win with a majority.
I'm sorry, the threshold is where the dotted line is over
Correct.
there?
Mhm.
Okay. And just to be clear, the numbers that are up there are the first choice for each
All
of,
first
for
choices.
each of those beverages.
Yeah.
They're absolute numbers, not percentages.
They're absolute
Absolute
numbers.
So yeah, that's
They're,
yeah.
they're absolute.
37 votes for
Right.
coffee, 35 for water,
Right.
28 for tea.
So
25
based on what
coffee.
you just said, the hot chocolate vote goes to the second choice.
Yeah, so hot chocolate is going to be eliminated. So click next, Josh here, and you'll see hot chocolate is eliminated. And then, as I said before, based on where the voter said, like, so hot chocolate's my first choice, but my next choice is going to be, and you have some for coffee, some for water, some for tea, and some for latte. And
And
they're all added, and that's tabulated for the second round. But we still don't have a winner yet, right? So we're gonna go on to the next round. We eliminate latte. Latte was, Josh, that was your top
That was
choice,
my
right?
top
So
choice.
your top,
Josh
your
is out
top
of
choice,
luck.
No.
your top choice is out, but again, Josh, you still have, your voice is heard, and so your next choice is being considered. And so again, we tally, we see coffee has 59, they've added 19 votes, water 43 with five votes added, and tea with 41 with 5 votes added, but still no majority. So we need to do this one more time. We'll do it one more time. We eliminate tea, we throw it right in the river, right? And then we see by the additional votes that coffee gets that 14 more additional votes to have 73 and to win in this election. So that's how this process works, the round by round, eliminating the candidate in the lowest place and then redistributing the votes going forward. So that's just the basic example to show you how you implement this for Montgomery County. There's a couple things that I'll just talk briefly about, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues. One thing is, in terms of how our current system, Maryland has our current equipment we can do ranked choice voting. I've talked to the state board administrator, Jared Demarinis. Our current election system, we can create ranked ballots, we can scan the ballots, we can collect the data. We cannot do the tabulation with our current software, but we just need to get the software up to date to move forward with that. If we don't do the software update, we do have access and can use a third-party tool that's made by the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, which is free and federally tested for elections to do the tabulation. That third-party tool is calibrated based with you all. You work on it on your own, have your own copy of that software, and you program it for how your elections run and how you have rules about how eliminations happen, ties, all that sort of stuff. So you set up all of the rules for how it's done in the tabulation, and it goes forward with that. So we have the resources to be able to do that. Right now, we just need to either get updated software or use the other software that we have. In terms of just talking about what we're working on at both the local, state, and county level, at the city level, as I think Boris mentioned this, that cities can manage their own elections, and so along with Tacoma Park that uses it right now, there are several cities who are looking at this, including Rockville. We've had conversations with the Rockville City Council, and we're engaging with other cities that are looking at this and with their board of elections or board of supervisors of election. So we're working with them on the process of how they would do that. And it's both through their charter and whatever system that they need to do the update and adoption. At the county level, as I think David mentioned, and I'm almost out of time. Okay, at the county level, we have enabling legislation that we're working on, and as it's crossover day, we're seeing where that will lead to and move forward. And I'll just share this, is that the last piece was just some sample ballots to show you how it might look. And we can talk about that more as we go through kind of the process, but I'll leave it there for the first part.
Okay, thank you. All right, Josh, you're up.
Great, thank you, Mr. President. It's great to be back with you all in Maryland. You mentioned I was in the Marines. My first duty station was Aberdeen Proving Grounds. And so I started my Marine Corps career as a Maryland resident for a time. And that was shortly after September 11th. We flew in from BWI the very weekend after September 11th. And I was impressed by the patriotism of Maryland residents as we drove to Aberdeen during that time. And so it's great to be back with you all. And I know how much you guys care about democracy in America here in the very birthplace in our nation's capital. So I was the chief elections officer for Utah County, which is the second largest county in Utah with over 700,000 residents. Our state legislature authorized ranked choice voting as an option for local cities. I'm very proud of the work we did in Utah County. So proud, in fact, that we invited Caleb and his team from Congress to come visit our ballot center and see how we do elections. When it comes to tabulation and things like that. A couple of details that the election nerds in the room will like to hear about. So some things unique to Utah. We're a universal vote by mail state, which means every active registered voter receives a ballot in the mail. About 97% of voters in Utah cast their ballots by mail. About 3% show up in person to polling locations either early or on election day, often because their registration is not up to date or not active, or they're new to the state, or if they're a voter with a disability, they want to use an accessible ballot marking device, they might come in person for those reasons. But every voter votes on paper. We tabulate ballots, and just parlance, in my view of election administration vocabulary, tabulation means to transform the voter's intent as expressed on a ballot into some sort of data result that tells you who won the election, to sort of tally the votes, if you will. That'll come in important in a second as I talk about the software used to automate the ranked choice process. But the tabulation system that we use is ES&S, which is the same that you all use in Montgomery County. So we use the same scanners, DS850s, for our central count, which get a lot of use given that most of our ballots are coming centrally, being delivered as vote by mail ballots. Voters, of course, submit their ballots by mail or in drop boxes, or can drop them off in person. When it came to ranked choice voting, though, our legislature authorized local cities to use ranked choice voting, and our county was the first to administer those elections. So we used all of the same systems and processes, the same paper ballots. We program our own ballots, meaning we design and program them in our system ourselves in-house, as opposed to having ES&S do them as a service. But ES&S can do them as a service, including ranked choice style ballots. But in terms of the look and feel and experience that voters have with our system, it was the same, with the exception that the ballot looks slightly different when you can mark first, second, third for a candidate, as opposed to just bubbling one candidate. Bubbling, not Xing, right? Or checking. But we use the same systems for that ballot delivery, ballot return, tabulation of ballots, processing results. And then the final step, when you export the results for posting them publicly or reporting to the state elections office, you can get a data file that comes natively out of the ES&S system, kind of called the cast vote record, but that's another detailed term that means a lot of things. But basically, there's essentially a giant data sheet that tells you ballot number 1 was first choice for David, and second choice for Diane, and third choice for Daniel. Ballot number 2 was first choice for Daniel, so forth, so forth, so forth. And then that data file, you can automate the winner selection process under ranked choice voting rules, using an open source tool that was offered to any election jurisdiction by the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, where Ryan's from. And we use that tool to automate the process that you went through laboriously by hand. And they also have the single transferable vote option, so no more by hand single transferable vote. But I have personally done ranked choice voting by hand as well, because in my capacity in the Republican Party of Utah, our caucus and convention system, a grassroots process for candidate nomination, utilizes ranked choice voting and has for 20 years. So I was first introduced to ranked choice voting long before I actually worked in election administration. And I was curious about it and got involved and learned how to tabulate ballots by hand. And the Utah Republican Party and also the Democratic Party often use ranked choice voting in their conventions to nominate candidates to speed up the process of what would otherwise be a multiple round voting scenario. This is very similar to what the state of Virginia did during the pandemic in 2020, when they nominated Glenn Youngkin as their Republican nominee. They had multiple candidates running. They used ranked choice voting in order to speed up that multiple candidate, multiple round process and arrive at their consensus winning nominee, so to speak. This is one of the features of ranked choice voting that jurisdictions like, especially for candidate nominations, because, you know, say it's a Republican nomination, the real question is what variety of vanilla do you want? It's not vanilla versus chocolate versus strawberry. It's vanilla cream versus French vanilla versus vanilla bean versus, right? So oftentimes there may not be, you know, you might not get your favorite vanilla, but you're going to get a version of vanilla that everybody can agree on. And I think that's the purpose of ranked choice voting elections, is often to arrive at a better understanding of consensus without the sort of bitter polarization that sometimes can feel like false polarization. And this is something that city council members reported to us, is that in city council races in Utah, they're nonpartisan. You're fighting over, you know, weed ordinances and sidewalks and water pipes. There's not a lot of room for polarization, but when you have 2 or 3 people in a race running to get elected, you have to find something to be polarized about. And I think with the ranked choice process, it conveys to the voter that no. This is not a this person and none others. This is not a me versus them. It's well, there's a few different voices and options. How do you assess these options and stack them up? Okay, a couple more notes about election administration. I've heard that you do a lot of manual ballot duplication. I would presume this is because of your UACAVA voting population, which is probably pretty high. What we did in our jurisdiction is, again, we have electronic ballot delivery and return for UACAVA voters, and that right is also extended to voters with a disability. But instead of doing email ballots, which are permitted, we encourage voters and offer them the opportunity to use an electronic ballot delivery and return system. So we offered, for example, an app called Votes. There's others that we've used, Democracy Live, the Omni Ballot product. There's Enhanced Voting as another vendor that offers this. There's a lot of new technology out there where you can deliver ballots securely and anonymously to your UACAVA voters, and they can then vote those ballots and send them back electronically through this system. On the administration side, that simply means that you go in, unlock these ballots, and essentially download what is automatically created, a visual PDF of a ballot that is scannable. So you can simply go and say, oh, these 500 UACAVA votes, we went through each of the affidavits, we verified the voter's identity, export, print, you now have a stack of 500 scannable ballots instead of doing manual duplication. But when we do manual duplication, we usually use our Express Vote ballot marking devices to create a scannable ballot that represents the damaged ballot or the email that we needed to do a manual duplication for. Another important consideration when it comes to reporting results in ranked choice contests, as we saw the demo that Michelle showed us, there's another free tool on the internet where you can take the ultimate winning results of who won the election and who got this many second and third place votes and that sort of thing. And you can create a nice visual chart very easily through an open source website called RCViz. It stands for visualization. And so we would use that tool on election night to report results. Our process in reporting results for ranked choice contests was not significantly burdensome. Certainly, traditional election results are arithmetic, right? You're just adding together votes. So-and-so got the first amount and second amount. So it's 100 votes and 200 votes. And of course, ranked choice results are a little more complicated because you have multiple rounds. And these are how the vote secondary preferences were redistributed. So that process using the RC tab tool with our data file, it's a few clicks, you export a file, you now know who won because the ranked choice voting rules and that sequence is automated to select the winner. You can show those results with this visualization tool so that voters and residents and media can see a similar chart as you saw with the coffee example. And so for us, it was an extra 10 or 15 minutes to export the results and then load them into these tools and make them available for display as we would other kinds of results. So in our case, we always reported preliminary ranked choice voting results alongside traditional style elections. Some jurisdictions have been slow to report ranked choice results, and some people blamed ranked choice voting for that speed of results. those are really administrative decisions that are made based on the convenience of the jurisdiction. There's really nothing technically that holds you back. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer. I don't want to take more time, but great to be with you all and share our experience.
Thank you so much. Ryan, let's go to you.
Thank you, members of the board, for having me here today. My name is Ryan Kirby, Director of Policy at the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. And like David said, I used to be Senator Kagan's Chief of Staff. And during my time with her, I also worked with her on the Montgomery County authorizing RCP bill. So this is not my first experience with this bill. The Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to supporting election administration across the country for ranked choice voting elections. We don't do any advocacy. I'm not here to tell you you should do something or you shouldn't do anything. So I just want to make that abundantly clear. Michelle's already done a great explanation of what ranked choice voting is, but we also have a lot of really helpful information on our website that a number of jurisdictions have basically just copy pasted when they've made their own RCV explainer websites and those kinds of things, but also available for voter education needs. Josh started going into some of the implementation details, and so I would just want to highlight that every 2 years we create our RCV maps report. It's a state-by-state analysis of every state's voting system capabilities for ranked choice voting, as well as some of the just specific implementation details. And I just want to let you know that we're working on our 2025 update, and Maryland, and like Michelle said, continues to be 100% RCV capable. In that report, we also go through a lot of the specific aspects of RCV implementation and how that alters or plays a role in existing election administration practices. So just going through a few of those aspects, ballot design. I know Michelle passed out a sample ballot that you can see. So ES&S, we recommend highly the grid ballot just because, which I believe is shown on there, that it uses the least amount of space on your ballot while trying to get the biggest bang for your buck, essentially. Typically recommend about 5 to 8 rankings, with 5 as a minimum, just to ensure that voters have enough opportunities to rank so that they can have their voices heard. The ES&S ballot can fit up to 10 rankings on there. It would just take up the whole left to right side, basically. 5 rankings, you can fit one contest in just that side of the column. And for multi-winner elections, because I know Montgomery County has 4 at-large seats, that is also something that can be done on ES&S, and the actual design of the ballot is the same. So the voter experience for whether it's a single winner election or a multi-winner election is the same. Moving on to voter education, there are a lot of really great resources out there that already exist because, like David had said, there are a number of jurisdictions and Josh's experience that have already implemented ranked choice voting. So if Montgomery County were to move forward with this, there are already a lot of lessons learned and best practices established. There are other organizations such as Democracy Rising that are focused almost entirely on voter education for ranked choice voting elections. They also work with candidates to provide training for them. So there are a lot of resources already existing for voter education. A lot of the exit polls that exist in ranked choice voting jurisdictions show voters supporting and understanding the instructions that were given to them, typically in the 80 to 90% range, which hard to think of 80 to 90% of people that can agree on anything. So that's always encouraging to see. When you're thinking about voter education and what voters want to know, the vast majority of the voter education campaign is spent teaching voters how to fill out their ballot, because it is going to look different for them, especially for something they've been using for years and years. So the vast majority of a voter education campaign is spent educating them how to fill out a ballot. What does it mean when you do this kind of ranking and those kinds of things? And like I said, there are a lot of great resources that already exist for those kinds of things. And like Ranked Vote, like doing those kinds of mock elections is really helpful. There are a number of jurisdictions that voted on names for snow plows, like all these different things that get a lot of really great community involvement. And then thinking about ballot counting and centralization, Josh did a great description of a lot of those procedures, so I won't go super in detail with that. But like he said, it's a policy decision when it comes to results displays and some of those aspects. Ranked choice voting does tend to highlight, when you're implementing it, a number of existing practices that you're using that in plurality that can sometimes be hidden to the average voter just because they don't think about it, like when Alaska, they're waiting 15 days to get all the ballots in and those kinds of things. But with ranked choice voting, it was a policy decision to do any kind of delay. There are a lot of great jurisdictions that are exercising what we consider to be best practice for releasing the unofficial round by round tabulation. So as you would release any kind of like plurality elections, every day as you're canvassing or anything like that, whenever you would provide an update, we would recommend providing the round by round tabulation. And with the software, you're just getting all that data and you're putting it into the software and it'll do the calculation for you in seconds to minutes, depending on the size of the file itself. So there's no crazy additional burden there. And I want to point to San Francisco, California, and Portland, Oregon. Multnomah County handled the election for Portland, Oregon. They do a really great job of communicating to voters ahead of time what to expect for results and when to expect them. They had pre-planned timelines for when they were going to be releasing results, or if they didn't have any new data, the new ballots didn't come in, they didn't count them. They communicated that they just didn't have any new data, that kind of thing. And you can go through and you can look at their previous election results and you can see how different round by round tabulations changed over time as new ballots came in, or they didn't change because there weren't a whole lot of new ballots or anything like that, or the election results just tended to center around a specific winner. And lastly, audits and recounts. Recounts are particularly they're always going to be time intensive. So whether it's a plurality election or ranked choice voting, I will concede for sure that a ranked choice voting recount definitely will add some time to it. But there are a lot of great best practices that already exist for it. There are a number of ranked choice voting recounts that have already been conducted in places. Portland, Maine actually had the first recount that resulted from a tie in a ranked choice voting election. So that was an interesting experience for the first there. But I just
What did they do?
So they had to use their usual tie-breaking decision. I believe they pulled a name out of a hat and then they had their official winner and then they went on to the normal recount.
So you're saying that when they did ranked choice voting, it ended up in a tie, and then when they did the recount, it also ended up in a tie?
No, so the recount ended up, I think ended up being like 13 or some votes that ended up separating it. But the recount did reveal the ultimate winner. But yeah, the original machines, whether they, adjudicating the check marks like we saw, that ended up changing a couple of votes here and there. But yeah, they got all the way down to the final two and they had a 50-50 tie. So it was interesting.
Wow.
And then for audits, I know conventional audits have already been conducted on ranked choice voting, and there are best practices for those as well. And then RLAs are a new area of auditing that I know are emerging throughout the country.
What was that?
RLAs, risk limiting audits.
Okay.
And those are a newer method of auditing elections, and they are gaining traction across the country. And Boulder, Colorado actually did the first governmental RLA of an RCV election in 2024. So that was a great leap forward for a lot of best practices and software that's involved with those kinds of audits. So there's definitely a lot of great resources that are already existing that Montgomery County, if that's something the state were moving forward with RLAs or just continue with conventional, that, you're not breaking any new ground, you already have resources that you can pull from. And then as has been mentioned, RCTab is our open source software that is used in a number of jurisdictions such as New York City, Utah, and it's been used for their ranked choice voting elections. It was also just used in Portland, Oregon's their ranked choice voting elections in 2024. And it doesn't touch a single ballot. All it is doing is taking the output that Josh described, the cast vote record of all of the data, and it does the calculations for you of moving all of the different transfers between the rounds of different candidates. And like I said before, it takes seconds to minutes depending on the size of the file. And I know we've been in conversation with the state board as to if that were something to move forward with Maryland, what the certification requirements and whatnot look like. We've worked with other jurisdictions across the country to make sure we meet whatever their standards are. I think I will close with that, but I just want to highlight that the Resource Center, we're available to work with the county if that's something that ranked choice voting, obviously you don't make the decision of the county council, but if that's something that is moved forward with Montgomery, we're more than happy to work with you. We work with a number of election officials across the country to support their elections and whatever their specific needs are.
Thank you for that. And obviously, it's up to the county council if the legislature says it's up
Yes,
to the
yep.
county council. So, as you know. Okay, so next would be Caleb.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you earlier for the kind introduction. Board, thank you so much for doing this. I was talking with David on the phone, I think Friday, and one thing I pointed out was how cool and refreshing it is to have this kind of conversation before a body that, if those steps were to happen that you just laid out, would be in charge of implementing them. And I just want to commend each of you for allowing this to happen. I think this is the way that many of us wish that every one of these decisions would happen. But as David said, my name is Caleb Hayes. I'm here today on behalf of the Center for Election Confidence. I'm their Chief Policy Counsel. And just want to highlight off the bat really what that phrase means. So this area we all live in always has, just really great names for things. And you wonder what's really behind the name. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan social welfare group. And what we focus on is ethics and professionalism in the electoral process. So working with officials like yourselves all across the country. And what we work to ensure is that all citizens are able to exercise their right to vote, and that reasonable common sense election procedures are in place, not only to prevent vote dilution, but also just to make sure that everyone can understand the process and has confidence in it. I think when we were on the phone on Friday, one of the things I said, which is just always true, is that voter perception and voter confidence can be a fickle thing, but it is so important because if the process isn't something that our median voter can understand or track from start to finish, then their likelihood or interest in participating in our system can be lessened. And that's really not something I think any of us is in favor of. We want all of our citizens engaged in this. So I just had a few comments off the top, and one of them is, I think it's so interesting how small this world is that's engaged in this. You stole my thunder. I was going to mention that we were there in my previous role on Utah County. And one of the really interesting things about that visit, not only was the Silicon Slopes just view that Utah has of everything, which is let's find a better way to do it, just really encouraging. But also in my previous role and then moving into where I am today, I've gotten a chance to meet with boards, groups like this in over half the states and territories. And it's so interesting to me how different things are everywhere, but also how much the same they are. Diane and I found out recently that her daughter is friends, let me see if I get this right, friends with someone I met when they were in high school, I think, and I was doing some sort of operative work. And then she went on to become on the Hill, and I was just at her wedding in Wichita, Kansas, 2 weekends ago. And so,
Saw Kate there.
yes, and it ends up being a really small world in these places. But coming back to the topic at hand, I think that's why local government is so important, because it is, as we were talking about earlier, more of these situations where we're looking to identify ways that we can make processes work better for citizens. And this conversation is so important, such an important part of the democratic process. CEC, for the reasons I'm about to get into, doesn't see the policy of ranked choice voting as the path forward, but it is this conversation and for the elected officials to ultimately decide how that works. What I'm really here today to talk about primarily is the Center for Election Confidence, the recent research that CEC did with Professor Nolan McCarty at Princeton University dealing with ballot truncation and ballot exhaustion, and the effect of those two, which I will define, but the effect of those two terms primarily on minority communities and minority voters. So ballot truncation and ranked choice voting, as we define it, is someone who doesn't choose all or mostly all, doesn't rank all or mostly all of the choices that are offered to them. And ballot exhaustion is a situation where perhaps you select only one or two of those choices, a few of the choices, you only rank a few of them, and then those do not end up being the choices that make it all the way to the end. And so at some point of the process, your rankings no longer are continued into that final total number. So if there are 9 choices and I only ranked 2 of them, and we needed to go into the third or further round, at a certain point, I have not chosen enough candidates to move forward, and we call that ballot exhaustion. So ballot truncation and ballot exhaustion. So what Professor McCarty looked at in particular were recent ranked choice voting operations in New York City, in Alaska, and primarily, and then also San Francisco, we saw some of the use of ranked choice voting as well. And in a nutshell, to get to the bottom line before I walk through some of the findings here, and that paper is available and I'm happy to share that as well. But before I get into all of the nitty gritty to get to the bottom line, what the findings were were that there is a real potential with ranked choice voting to decrease representation and electoral influence of minority voters. And in a bottom line sense, that is because ranked choice voting has the effect of working against the effect of, I'm not casting intentionality or aspersions on anyone, but the effect of, in many cases, of hitting at the underlying purpose of the Voting Rights Act, which is to ensure the free and fair elections for all, with protections against vote dilution for minority voters. In other words, to ensure that minority voters against a majority that may have a different view of whom they want to be in the office, that minority voters are able to elect a candidate of their choosing. And the reason for this is because in many situations, ranked choice voting will pit a cohesive minority voting bloc against multiple majority group candidates. And what this does is it effectively, we're in March Madness, so we're almost there. It effectively puts more majority players on the court than the cohesive minority bloc candidate that group is able to put forward. And so it ends up being a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-1 situation. You have more opportunities for your majority group candidates to succeed because there are more of those candidates available. And they can work together to eliminate the minority choice. And so as opposed to a traditional plurality voting where a cohesive minority voting bloc is able to put all of their support behind a particular candidate, and that candidate is able to work together with other groups or across the political and racial, the polarized racial voting divide to garner support and work toward being the candidate that crosses that first past the post line, gets the most votes. You end up with more people working against the minority candidate. And they will, in many cases, earn more votes and lock out the minority candidate from moving forward. So what does that really mean? That was a lot of words. It's kind of confusing. So here's where we really are on this. Let's look at a couple of situations. We have New York City, which has recently adopted ranked choice voting. And in New York City, Mayor Eric Adams was recently elected in the ranked choice voting process. So in that situation, we had racially polarized voting. We had a cohesive minority group of Black New Yorkers who wanted to support Eric Adams. And because he was the person who was in front all along, generally the issues I just talked about weren't as important. He was in front, the minority group is cohesive in voting, and they were able to support the candidate that they wanted, Eric Adams, and it moved forward. David, I see the confusion on your face. And okay, well, where I'm headed with this is we have this exception of what I'm talking about, which I think is illustrative for what I'm saying. And that is whenever there is a minority candidate from a cohesive minority voting bloc that is able to succeed and make it to that final round, we don't have these problems. This one person, the chosen candidate that has the broad-reaching political influence and support, is able to make it through for reasons outside of the ranked choice voting process. In other words, they're able to rise above the weaknesses and the pushback that I've just described in ranked choice voting in order to succeed. It ends up being an exception to the rule. What we see in other situations, though, and even in the New York City council races, which also used the ranked choice voting system to work, is that in many situations, we did not have the cohesive minority group's candidate of choice at the top with this broad political appeal in the same vein as Eric Adams. And in those cases, we have what I described earlier, which is that for Latino and Hispanic voting blocs, Asian voting blocs, they were not able to move forward with their candidate of choice because, again, there are more players on the court, March Madness, not football season, for the majority white voting bloc candidates than minority. We also see this transfer outside of New York City. We see this happen in Alaska, which has a slightly different system, which I'm sure many of us could get into, all of the nuances between, but basically a slightly different ranked choice voting system. And we see Mary Patola, I'm almost done, I promise, who is an Alaska native, and she was elected to Congress in the system similarly to Mayor Eric Adams in the previous Congress. She was the exception to the rule based on everything outside of the ranked choice voting system. But with that exception of this broad, wonderful chosen one candidate, fantastic, is able to work against it, we really see weaknesses for cohesive minority voting blocks. So that is our concern with this system. And thank you again so much for having me.
Thank you, Caleb, for that. And I'm sure we'll have questions when the time comes. Last but not least, Walter.
Well, thank you. You asked me not to talk about redistricting. Say one little thing, which is when we had our maps proposed, the one county we heard from with feedback, and it was strong, vigorous feedback, was Montgomery County elections. And boy, did they give us a piece of their mind about how, what we were doing to their precincts would make some voters to go out 2 miles further. It would make, it would cause problems for the staff and so forth. And we ran around and concluded we should have talked to Montgomery County elections much earlier. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. And so my point there is that for all of us, I'm particularly on the more theoretical side, and I hope I'm learning things from you today, because we will not get our theory right until we hear from everyone who has to actually administer the darn thing. It affects the theory. It causes us to reject some theories that looked good at first, to hear back from you about what works and what doesn't. So thank you in advance for your comments. Now, I, of course, have come prepared with lots of great remarks about the speed of tabulation and how, and of course, it was all that thunder was stolen. So I'm just going to add one or two shreds that were not stolen, which is that, for example, in jurisdictions where 21 people can run for a single office, and the rest of the country, they also
21 is a
there's
low
no-
number for us.
Right, and the rest of the country, I said, oh, there's no place like that, stop kidding us also.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I said, well, no, I live right near this place called Montgomery County, and it's like a never land. And I haven't even explained Tacoma Park to them yet. But no, so 4 places with lots of candidates on the ballot, for example, there is a fairly neat shortcut, and we can get to the issue of whether the first place finisher always winds up winning. The answer is not always, but the great majority of the time, it is the first place finisher. And those people who are in places number 15 and 17 and 19 in the Montgomery County roll of candidates don't win. So one of the things you can do, speak things up a little bit, and that many places do, is to say, we're not just cutting off the lowest finisher. We're going to start by cutting off everyone with less than 5% of the vote and redistribute all of those. Maybe for the second round, you can say everyone who hasn't made it to 10% by the second round, you're also out. And if you look at political scientists have at the overall question of does the first place winner always win, or how often does the second or third place winner win? The fact is that if you're not in the top 3 places, you are in fact going to be eliminated. The question is when. Order of elimination can sometimes matter, and that's important, but it's basically random to say cut off everyone below 5% or 10%. If it's a good rule and it speeds things up, if you're not doing this completely computerized approach on the cast vote record, which is a way in which theoretically you could get all of your rounds and all of your results in 5 minutes. It is in fact how some places announce the same evening, even though they have a bunch of eliminations. So keep that in mind. And I want to say just briefly that despite talk of best practices, and I fully appreciate how important those are in the business world, I think in a lot of these questions, there is no single best practice because there is no single typical jurisdiction. I mentioned numbers of candidates. I can guarantee, I work with my friends at the City Council in Frederick. I live in the suburbs, but we've been working together on that city's plans to introduce ranked choice voting. And I can guarantee it's not going to look like Tacoma Park. They are bound and determined not to look like Tacoma Park. No offense to Tacoma Park,
Right.
but different communities want different objectives. And so don't feel guilty about tailoring it to the way Montgomery County's political culture is. The fact is that several Minneapolis suburbs have ranked choice voting. I've gone and looked at theirs, and as someone who comes from a Republican background, I liked those kind of suburban ways of doing it. I'm not going to keep on talking about Tacoma Park because it's had enough abuse today. But you will find ways of doing things that are more typical in Republican communities, more typical in suburbs, more typical in moderate Democratic places, the whole thing. And then you've got places like San Francisco that do it their way. So don't assume that there's a best practice you have to follow. Feel free to adapt to the Montgomery County political culture. Now, I want to get to a set of issues having to do partly with education, which is tremendously important. The general conclusion of political scientists is that of places that have RCV, by the second round, most people are satisfied with it, and most of the practical problems, if there were any, have come down. But boy, that first round is a complete spectrum from places that really managed to screw it up pretty badly to places that where it's smooth and well accepted and people are happy. So what makes the difference in that first round? And one of the things that I tell people, even at the cost of slowing down the adoption of the thing, is I tell them, take your time, because for the administrators, it makes a difference whether they have one or more cycles to train their staff in a new way of doing things. And vendors, oh heavens, we haven't talked about vendors that much, but the fact is that vendors can do things, but often they can't do things right away. You have to wait for a whole different cycle to get the right stuff from the vendors. And as we saw with the cast vote records, if you are designing an election system completely from scratch, you can make it so that RCV tabulations, even with 35 candidates, are all available in the same evening. But everyone knows you are stuck with various legacy systems, with legacy equipment, with legacy software. So that's why I say, even if you're not getting it started at the very next political cycle, make sure that your election department and all of those involved, including the procurement people, have lots of warning, because you will have a happier experience. Second thing about public education is I like those little grids of 5 by 5 or whatever they are, the way in which most people learn about them. But there's two kinds of things that go wrong. And I'm going to say that one of them means that you've kind of failed and it's dysfunctional. And the other one doesn't mean that you fail and doesn't mean that it's dysfunctional. And the ones that you want to avoid is spoiled ballots. Those are dysfunctional. And spoiled ballots, unfortunately, ranked choice voting does not perfectly match human nature. And so you have some people who think, oh, it's like my 3 kids. I love them all. I couldn't prefer one to another. So they give their first choice ranking to each of the 3, and they spoil their darn ballot. Now, you also have people who say, oh, I love my favorite candidate so much, I'm going to give that candidate all 5 of my choices. And depending on where you are, that's a spoiled ballot or not, depending on the rules are. But those are some of the simple ways in which people, with all the goodwill in the world, can wind up spoiling their ballot. Head that off, cut off those ways of spoiling ballots. Now, what is not dysfunctional? What is not dysfunctional is truncation and exhaustion. And let me explain briefly why. And I'm sure that Michelle will have a lot of things to say about that study and why it doesn't impress us, but I'm just going to stick to half. I'm going to stick to half of it, which is that ranked choice voting is all about choice. And so are truncation and exhaustion. They are about different aspects and elements and dimensions of choice. I hear all the time from people who are reluctant about ranked choice voting. And I should say, by the way, to declare my suit, that I'm on the advisory board of Rank the Vote nationally, and I guess I'm the honorary co-chair of ranked choice voting. No, it is some fancy sounding thing, which doesn't require me to do any work, but anyway.
Not yet.
Except that he's here.
Well, but you didn't ask.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I hear all the time from people who say, my grandpa doesn't like ranked choice voting because he says he wouldn't ever feel comfortable other than casting the one vote. And I say, fine, the system is totally set up for someone to go in and cast a single vote for the single person, just like a runoff. If there's a physical runoff and your candidate didn't make it into the top 2, don't show up for the runoff. America is free that way. Australia has mandatory voting, but thank heavens we don't. So people should not feel guilty or as if something has failed if they have bullet voted for their favorite person and not used their additional spots. And exactly likewise, there are people I know who, put it in Montgomery County terms, will only vote for the people who are up county. Forget them if they're down county. And that means they're not going to use all of their, did that touch anyone too closely?
It's okay. The reverse would be true too.
Yeah, and that again is a totally legitimate reason for them to use only some of their choices and to get truncated and to get exhausted. And you find this on matters of high principle too. You find people saying that anyone who believes this, in conscience, I can't cast even my 5th choice vote for them. Or anyone who doesn't share my view or whatever. And exactly the same is true when groups are trying to have a concentrated group thing saying, no one from our group is on the county council, and I'm gonna bullet vote or vote only for people who are in, my group. Not only is there nothing wrong with that, that's how America works, that's how choice works. So don't look at statistics about, oh, well, there were all these exhausted ballots, and say something was dysfunctional. The fact is that in virtually all these elections, if you had gone and held a runoff between the top two candidates, which is the old-fashioned way of doing it, that drop off in vote from the first general election to that runoff is typically huge. So people are getting their choices. Don't be ashamed of it.
Thank you very much, and thank you all very much. So here's what I plan to do as far as the questions go. I'm gonna kind of alternate back and forth between two different sides of the table, and I'm gonna go last. But I'm not going to skip myself, I was gonna say. So I'm gonna give others a chance to go first. And you've all given us a lot to, I know 5 minutes is not enough, but on the other hand, I also know that we don't have more. So anyway, but we do, and now that we know each other, we have other opportunities to chat as well. Daniel, I'm going to start with you, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me just say, this is such a rich intellectual dialogue, and in a very civil way, which I believe will benefit not only us as a board, but really the public. The theoretical analysis are great, but let's talk about in terms of I think most of our, the way I look at it is the implementation of it, right? Us, and not only us, but critically our VIP staff or our staff who really does the work itself. So my question would be, can you describe each of you just briefly? What do you think the impact would be when it comes to workload on the staff?
Impact of what?
Workload. If they all answer, you're gonna run out of time.
Oh, really?
So whoever feels like they have something, you've probably had the
Yeah,
experience with,
sure.
So
Workload first consideration, one of the biggest pieces of workload, as you probably are aware, ballot duplication. And if you're doing a lot of manual ballot duplication, you have more bubbles to fill for every race. So if you have a race that's, one bubble for the race, there might be 10 candidates, but only one bubble. Well, only one bubble needs to be manually replicated versus 10 bubbles in terms of ranking. So that's why I would definitely recommend you look into a tool for electronic ballot delivery and return for UACAVA voters, which there's a number of vendors that are doing great work there that really makes that convenient for voters. The other piece of workload that's the second biggest is adjudication, which is a cousin to manual ballot duplication. Adjudication is where you're saying, you're confirming on screen that the ballot was read correctly and the machine has indicated to you that something could be wrong. Typically, it's like an overvote, right? Where you voted for more than one name and you have to confirm that it's an overvote manually, with the computer system, oftentimes with two judges, if you will. That's at least how we did it. So when it comes as a board, you do it as a board.
Yeah.
Okay, so when that's for all overvotes, you as a board review them?
for anything where the intent of the voter is not clear.
All
Okay.
adjudications.
All adjudications.
And it has
And
to
that's
be
a-
by a quorum.
Okay, so it seems to me that perhaps the term adjudication can have some different meanings. Because if let's say that there's an undervote, there's a race that's been left blank. Do you have to review and confirm that?
No.
Okay. So when I say adjudication, it's small ballot errors. But it sounds like what you were doing is if there's a genuine judgment call, then it comes to you. Correct. Okay.
Josh, do you hand canvass every mail-in ballot?
So every paper mail ballot gets optically scanned. If that ballot has what's called an adjudication error, so to speak, then on screen it gets reviewed. So for example, every undervote, the system, well, I think you can actually configure this in ES&S as well. I think you can say, yeah, ignore the undervotes. We're not even going to review them. but you could have a policy to review undervotes on screen to say, hey, we scanned 10,000 ballots. Here's a batch of 250 where we need to confirm overvotes, undervotes, and write-in names. Double voting, whatever. And so that's what I say. When I say adjudication, that's what I mean.
So in that case, then, if it doesn't fall into one of those situations, it gets opened, the ballot gets opened and fed through the scanner and nobody looks at it.
We actually never look at the ballot before it being scanned. We remove it from the envelope blindly, we stack them up and scan them.
Okay.
So then, so it's like, we receive tons of ballots, we say, yep, these are all acceptable, signatures match our records and all of that. We open them all up, we scan them all. And then if there's a problem with the way that the vote's been cast, most of that work's being done on screen in the ES&S system. And so that's where the manual ballot review comes in, and that usually applies to write-ins, confirming, oh, that was a vote for John Johnson, but misspelled. Well, intent of the voter is clear. It's John Johnson, just doesn't know how to spell John Johnson. That's a vote for a valid, let's say, write-in candidate. In the case of overvotes and undervotes, the workload for ranked choice voting could come in where you might have to review on screen that this voter has voted, for John Johnson, first, second, third, fourth, and fifth place. And the system's like, is this a problem? It's like, well, no, you need to count it as simply a first place vote for John. And you can ignore all these subsequent rankings for John. He doesn't get extra points for that, right? But in the case of an overvote where it's like, well, they rank John and Susie first choice. Okay, that's a problem. The ballot is now spoiled. We're not counting a vote, can't vote, twice. Some of the other errors that might happen is, well, John is first and Susie is second and Mark is fifth. Okay, well, so you got a first, a second, and a fifth choice. Is that like a first, a second, and a third choice, or is that like a first and a second? And I want to protest and tell you how bad I hate Mark. And so this is where a policy decision needs to come in with implementation to say, well, how do you deal
What
with?
did you all do?
With for us, we will go ahead and count as almost an omission a secondary preference if there's only one gap. So first, second, fourth place, that's okay. First, second, third.
Okay.
First, second, fifth place, we're gonna start ignoring your subsequent places, because what we think is going on is you're somehow trying to downvote candidates. And so the last thing we would want to do is to lift your down votes into up votes.
So if it's a skip of one, you kind of assume that it's a mistake.
That's right.
And if it's a skip of two, you assume that it's a mistake.
That's right. Yep.
What do you think the impact would be on the workload if you had a jurisdiction that had a policy of hand processing every single mail-in ballot, which is what Montgomery County does?
Help me understand the hand processing. So
We open it,
uh-huh.
a team of two bipartisan reviews it.
Right.
That's instead of scanning it,
Okay.
they review it for any anomalies, any issues, which it would take us hours to list the many things that
Sure.
could be. And then that needs, if it's something that's not obvious that can be corrected by those two, then it goes to the board for adjudication.
Mhm.
All these things get recopied.
Sure. So
So
you're talking, well, I don't think ranked choice voting would impact your manual mail ballot review process very much. Because sort of what I'm talking about is if everybody is voting normally, some people will vote by mail. And some of those vote by mail ballots they'll all be reviewed in your case, and some of them may need some conversation, right? I don't think ranked choice voting would significantly impact work burden for you all in the case of your vote by mail ballots. It would be more of a, insignificant or moderate increase in workload because you might have slightly more errors on ballots that came by mail. And then there's a little more of a review process. Do you contact the voter if they overvoted and undervoted in a vote by mail? So, okay. Really what we
It's
experience.
4 circles to fill, like you said.
Okay,
and marks, and you can't tell
right.
which, and I am skeptical of the majority of the voting public that is going to be able to embrace all these changes and do it properly. And the first pass will be our canvasser. So I know that sounded like I'm throwing down my marker on this, but what I'm just trying to get to is with a change of this enormity, And the length that it takes to review ballots right now on a simple first, on the ballots that with the usual system, the one that we're using right now is very labor intensive. And so, did I reach the end of that
No,
sentence?
that's okay. I think
So when you're deciding, did they mean to say 1, 2, 3, or 5, or if they mark 3 as number 1? I anticipate a lot of that.
Well, it sounds like if we have a policy in advance, which it sounds like you did, and I haven't had time to think about your policy, but I certainly can on the face of it just say, oh, it's an unreasonable policy, that you skip 1, it's a mistake, and you skip 2, it's a statement. That could be true. If you have 2 number 1s, you know, we can't help you because, you know, how do we choose which number 1 is number 1? You know, now we may pull out the magnifying glass to see if it's a 1 or a 7, you know, but otherwise, you know, it sounds like for a number of those situations, there just has to be a decision made as to what our policy would be.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't necessarily be the same. Now, Daniel barely got 1 question.
Oh, my God.
And I'm coming back to you. I'm coming back.
okay, just wanted to make sure, Mr.
Yeah,
President.
no, I just, he barely got 1.
Just add, real quick, and I'll share this.
Actually, Michelle, I was gonna just
Oh,
give
yeah.
the rest of my time to you.
Well, just that, Minneapolis does an audit of their elections and does surveys with election judges, voters, candidates of like their process, and they've been using it since 2009. So they have reports, and I'll share them with you that with election judges, like they ask them, how does this impact your time? And how does this change like your workload? And the response is overwhelming it did not change their time and spent on their work dramatically. They were still doing all of their jobs. It didn't add this extra burden to them administering elections, to engaging with voters. It was part of the entire process. The other piece of this, and I've had some conversations with Boris, is just on the training that's needed. And so obviously, you need to do robust training with your election judges and everyone else. And so that's part that's incorporated in your training already. There might be obviously another, I think Boris was saying, maybe it's another hour or 2 of time that you have to spend on that. But there's ways that you can make sure that that's part of how you're engaging with them. There's also conversations about how you designate or have specific people that are just focused on handling that. But typically, jurisdictions are able to have their election judges incorporate the work into what they're doing, and it doesn't change that dramatically because they are doing, these are jurisdictions that are doing vote for one, vote for many, ranked choice voting elections all at the same time, and they're doing all of those as well. So that I'll send the data on that. So yeah.
I know Boris wanted to say something.
Yeah, I won't hijack the conversation. I just think that the volume matters. And I think that the numbers have to be put in the perspective. Montgomery County had 192 mail-in ballot requests last election, 165,000 were returned. 35,000 were web deliveries, 24,000 were returned. We do not have capacity to bypass and duplication of that. And I'm understanding colleague Newton was explaining that that's what you have. People can return mail electronically going to print at the same site. So these are nuances maybe on the technical discussion here in the labor hours of something there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And then,
Did you have another question?
yeah, just
Yeah,
a brief
okay.
one. I mean, we're talking about in terms of the implementation and the administration. Let's talk about the actual voting, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what we want citizens to do.
The benefits?
Yes.
So I'll speak to voters. The first piece on voters, they do understand it because there is an intuitive piece of like, I make choices every day, I rank how I'm doing stuff. When people say that they can do that, and that's the 80-90% of people who are surveyed after elections. For candidates, we see candidates who campaign differently, that they're able to do things where they're like, you may like Josh as he's your top choice, but I hope you'll consider me as your next choice because X, Y, Z. Here's where we align, here's where there's differences, and maybe you might actually like those differences and want to vote for me. Also, as a campaign manager, and I was a former campaign manager, you know, like if you're going to doors and you see somebody's yard sign already and it's your opponent, you're like, all right, well, not on my list, and you're moving on. This changes that dynamic as well, where again, we want a democracy where you're fully participating, where people are being engaged, where you're saying, I can have a conversation with you. And, you know, yes, maybe we're not gonna align, but if I understand your issues better as a candidate, then maybe that influence, if I win, it influences how I do policy and how I'm engaging with different people, because you're not just saying, I'm just gonna go for this small group. You're actually trying to get that consensus in with everyone. So it really makes those differences in terms of less negative campaigning, you know, more conversations about the issues. You know, you do also have more women and more people of color who run, and we've seen this like with public financing added, we've seen like the increase in the number of candidates that want to run. I strongly believe that public financing and ranked choice voting go really well together, especially when you have races with lots of folks who run, because of the way that.
You're
if you-
losing some votes here, Michelle.
Well, I'll just say that's my
To my-
personal opinion.
They're
It's
on my
my-
left geographically, but not politically.
I will just say that's my personal opinion. I'm just gonna say, I feel like there's a, yeah, I feel like there's a benefit that's added there, but I want to just say, like, if we've added public financing, we have more candidates running. And yet we've seen this, and I use the example in the sample ballot where you have like a lot of candidates and you're trying to make a choice. I strongly believe that helps, and that's part of the impetus for our organization, where we had many people in the community who came out and said, we want to be able to have a different system. Let's look at ranked choice voting. And that really came out of, you know, especially with the public, when we first did it in 2018, where people were like, okay, how can we make this work better for us? So, you know, public financing aside, we won't get into that, but just like in terms of the benefit for voters and candidates who are running, like that's where I see the greatest.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, Ami.
Okay, let me take a few minutes here. I am concerned primarily about two things, and they involve the logistics of the things that we as a board do and oversee. We have an enormous percentage of mail-in ballots here in Montgomery County. Boris could probably give you an exact number. All I can tell you is it's an enormous.
Roughly a third.
Mhm.
Okay, a lot of these come in after the election. They are mailed on election day. We count them if they come in by what?
10 days
10
after.
days
Yeah.
later.
Mhm.
So with a third of the ballots conceivably coming in 10 days after election day, that is a significant chunk, and it may drastically change what you think your result is on election day. It's not as if it's only 10%.
Yeah.
Of the ballots, and I'm concerned about the voters understanding how long it will take to get the process underway. They get upset at us now. It will only be worse, in my view, under that sort of a circumstance.
Oh,
Well, wait a
yeah.
moment,
Oh, yeah.
let me finish my
Yeah.
second, and
Mhm.
then you guys can decide how to respond. My second issue is voter education. And those of you who were here early enough to hear some of the discussion of the board before we got into this. We had that discussion about the ballot. It didn't get counted by the machine because it had a check mark instead of filling in the oval. People do that. People ignore the instruction to fill out the oval. They ignore the instruction to use ink. We have to duplicate a lot of ballots because they're done in pencil, not ink. And the scanner machine won't read the pencil. It's the way it is. And so we have to go and fill in over the pencil. And I don't know what percentage of that is, Boris, but it was a lot.
Yeah.
If you can't get voters to follow those simple instructions, how do you expect them to understand the complexity of this, which is more complex than, and the ballot clearly says, fill out an ink, fill in the oval.
With a graphic.
Yes, yeah.
And,
The
you know,
graphic's not very good.
I-
It looks like a pencil in the graphic, so, you know, we're not happy with the graphic.
no, we're not happy. But the instructions are in fact clear, and you should assume, in my view, that instruction like that is simple. It's like a speed sign on the side of a roadway. You know what it tells you to do. And yet people ignore it all the time. And so I'm concerned about getting people to understand what to do properly when we can't get them to understand it today. And those are my
Yeah,
two
binary
real points.
choice.
I'll just give one on the tally piece, the one option that you could do, which is, I believe what San Francisco does is they just tally all first choices, is that right? Or, so they only do first choices, on election night, whatever comes in, they're tallying that and displaying those results. With the 10-day window, as you're bringing in the mail-in ballots, then you do the same thing, you're just adding into the first choices count. And you're not doing the round by round tabulation until you get to the 10-day window when you know, like, you're not having.
As it stands now, we have never finished counting first choice or only choice
Yeah.
ballots by 10 days.
Yeah.
Well,
Because of our volume.
yeah,
We
I'm
have
just saying, like,
probably
that's what you would
twice
show.
the number of ballots that you
Yeah.
do in Utah County.
Yeah.
So.
I would just say
so-
show just first
Right.
choices
Oh,
and then,
right.
and because.
And
because
that's a
of the
common
age.
thing,
Yeah,
that they show the first choices and then you do the ranked choice at the end.
yeah,
But one of my questions would be, we could be looking at doing that not after the 10th day, we could be looking at
After
doing
the
that
20th or
after the 5th,
30th.
or after the 15th.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we
then
can-
now admittedly, if we have software that does that, the software can do it quickly, but that doesn't mean that we can explain it quickly.
Let me share a couple of our experiences. So first of all, when it comes to vote by mail, we're 100% vote by mail, and
They changed that today.
They did.
did something weird.
yeah, they
today.
did make something
I
weird.
heard.
Legislatures are prone to do weird things.
Yes, I
Just making sure, do you still live there?
I do.
Okay.
But I might have been on a flight here when they were doing things. No, they've reduced some of it. They've kind of pushed it to more of an opt-in program. So, but
Just don't
nothing.
give your home address while you're here.
Yeah, I
Okay.
will say this, nothing about ranked choice voting specifically changed anything about the speed at which we process vote by mail ballots and report results. And there's really nothing that I can envision for you all that would fundamentally change the speed of your process, the speed of delivering final results as opposed to preliminary election results, because you have a lot of ballots come in by mail. Probably 30% of our ballots come to us on election day. And most of those are paper ballots in envelopes because they drop them off in the drop box as the polls are closing.
Right.
And so we have just tubs of ballots just stacked up in the office at 11 p.m. on election
I'm
night.
glad to know that procrastination is not limited to Montgomery.
It is a human thing, not a Montgomery County.
Right.
But you don't
Yeah,
make
yeah.
the process every ballot when you take it out of the envelope, which we are
Right, but-
required to do.
But that would be true for a plurality race as well. For your.
It seems to
But
me
it's
that it seems to me that the difference is, if I understand it correctly, in order to process this correctly, we're not only counting who has the most votes, we're counting who has the least. And in order to do that, we have to count all the votes before we start that process. Because I suppose we could do it unofficially and then do it more officially later, but that'll just confuse people. If we go until the end, what that means is however long it would have taken us before, and I take your point that if it took us a long time before, this is, it's not gonna get faster, but by changing to ranked choice voting. And it might not make it slower to get the first choice votes. The question is, how long does it take us to do the ranking process?
Well, that's literally a 5-minute process. That's all automated. Like, that was insignificant. That's why my question, or my answer to Daniel's question was, the work burden is really more about confirming undervotes and overvotes in your on-screen ballot review process, which we call adjudication, but that's not your adjudication. Your adjudication is judgment call.
That's correct.
Whereas our adjudication is judgment call and confirming
Right, but
undervotes and
So
overvotes.
sometimes the overvotes are judgment calls. Sometimes they're people who have crossed something out, or you have to figure out whether they crossed it out or not.
Right.
Or.
Yeah, I mean, I
or
think
whatever.
the ballot review process adds maybe 5 to 10% time because of ranked choice voting. But ranked choice voting didn't add significant time because it was vote by mail. or when it comes to reporting results, that was not a significant time burden. So I think your time for processing would be the same as for plurality races. And then your question about confusion in instructions, we had this same concern when we first implemented. And one of the things we did to test this was we took ballots without instructions to a variety of populations, high school students, assisted living facilities, like when people are maybe over the age of 90 even were in part of our sample. And we gave them ranked choice ballots with no instructions. And we said, oh, we're testing some new equipment. We want to talk about the election and we want to do this little sample vote. And we gave them no context. And our purpose was to see naturally, organically, whether the ballot itself was intuitive or confusing. And so we meandered this audience of folks and kind of heard what they were saying, observed what they were doing. And to our discernment, the ballot itself, the ranked ballot, was intuitive. People knew how to fill it out because it just sort of spoke for itself. And that's not even considering adding explicit instructions. Now, when you talk about voters being confused and not following the instructions today, well, that's a problem. That's always a problem. I remember seeing ballots in the 2020 election where they voted for Biden and Trump. And I'm like, you did not get the memo about American politics. Or maybe it was a protest, right? So.
Walter. And just kind of directly to address Ami's concern, we in Frederick County know all about this because it is now typical for the actual partisan winner of elections to change between election night when one side's votes have come in and when the mail votes have been counted. So Frederick County is stretched out on a rack of uncertainty of this sort, and it leads us to look at the state's procedures, which make Maryland so incredibly slow by nationwide standards. I wrote a whole article for Reason magazine about we all ought to just imitate Florida and be done with it and get results at the same night. But Maryland, this, as on so many things, the Maryland legislature never listens to me. And they have retained, and I feel as if ranked choice voting, it's as if there has been boozing going on through Mardi Gras, and we get blamed as the vanilla extract, that has 2 drops additional alcohol. Maryland has, as a policy matter, decided on all these things like votes drifting in, 10 days late, and
but that's from decades ago.
Well,
Yeah.
maybe from decades ago, but nonetheless, you can pile up a bunch of specific decisions that make Maryland, and of course, we fixed a couple of them,
Yeah.
because we do recognize them. But I do feel, again, as if, we are really being blamed for faults that are not ours.
I do want to say one thing, I'll come back to you in a second, which is that we've had 150 ballots come in since we certified, and we certified, right before Thanksgiving. And a number of the ballots, I don't remember the exact number, but a number of those ballots were mailed in a timely way from overseas, and they're still showing up now.
And
So-
those
so-
for 6 more months.
And, right, so, I'm very sympathetic to the people who want the results faster. I'm less sympathetic to the people who say that if it doesn't come fast, it's fraud, because, if it doesn't come fast, that just means that I wish I controlled the postal service, but.
Careful what you ask for.
Yeah. I am in no danger of being the person appointed to, at least for 4 years, to be the person appointed to control the postal service, although it would, I would have some things to do. But I'm just saying that, while I agree that Maryland has a process that makes it slow, not as slow as California, for example, but definitely makes us slower than Florida. But if we were going to suddenly say that we're only going to accept ballots that we receive by election day, for example, that would be a drastic change.
Yeah.
That's
It won't happen.
Yes.
It'll
Yes,
never-
yeah, no, and it's a state decision, it's not ours, right?
Yeah.
Right.
But it
So,
won't happen.
okay, did you have something more you wanted to?
No.
Okay,
I guess my
Okay.
only other question is you talk about software changes and software upgrades that would help all this. What's the cost of all that? I mean, we are also being budget crunched like mad.
but I want to know all about your duplication software, because we duplicate more, and you've been looking into that question for some time. Because the duplication software is of interest to us no matter what. We have more Maryland does not limit printed home ballots to UOCAVA and overseas voters. And as a result, Montgomery County has more ballots to duplicate than anybody. And if we could find a way to use machines more efficiently to duplicate ballots, it would be helpful. So I know that's not today's subject, but you may want to talk to me about that.
So the Army's first. about
The
cost of
software,
this.
I would highly recommend that as an ESNS customer, you use the RC tab tool that the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center has created. That is, I believe, the best way to automate and expedite your ranked choice voting winner selection and results reporting process.
Just to be clear, since we don't have ranked choice voting yet, what I was talking about, I realized Tommy was talking about ranked choice voting. What I was talking about was our existing system.
Yes.
Oh,
I was not talking about ranked choice voting
Yeah.
duplication.
You're talking like you're implying electronic ballot delivery and return.
We don't have electronic, we have electronic ballot delivery. We do not have electronic ballot return.
They have to print it and.
They have to print it and they have to print it and
Just
mail
like the
it
mail-in ballots.
and mail it back to us, and then we have to hand duplicate them.
Right.
And what
Because
I'm
it's not on ballot paper.
correct.
We can't force them to do it on ballot paper. Everyone has different.
Well,
voters.
well,
So see,
Yeah.
that's where I think you could envision a solution where you scan them. And you have maybe AI that can take
Scan
it
them how?
optically.
No, but our scanner doesn't.
I'm
take-
just like a flatbed scanner.
okay.
Like you would take pages from a file in the office.
I did not mean to hijack the
Yeah.
conversation. There's plenty with ranked choice voting.
Yep.
But if there is software that helps with duplication,
Yeah,
we're interested.
okay.
Okay,
Can I add a point just on this
yes,
too?
and then I'm gonna call on
Okay.
Tina.
So
Okay.
we mentioned software about ranked choice voting, and that's the point I wanted to make here, which
Okay.
is that voter confidence, as I said at the beginning, is a fickle thing, and it doesn't always have to be rational. And one of the weaknesses in ranked choice voting is the software. And it's not that I'm suggesting it's imperfect in any way. I'm sure it is. It's that it's not immediately easy for the median voter to see what happens when they register, when they cast, when their ballot goes in, and then a result comes out. Now, when we were talking on the phone before, certainly in a perfect world, you can imagine where everyone reads the instructions, everyone understands what those mean, everyone wants to wait the length of time to get through all the ballots coming in, the initial, et cetera. But the software creates a black box problem for a lot of voters, which is it's very difficult to know what's going on in the algorithmic system.
All I would say to that is that every election that I can recall, long before I was on the board, our board has canvassed for that period of time after the election.
Mhm.
And I can tell you, as long as I've been on the board, the number one question I get is, what do you mean? Isn't the election over?
Well,
And that's even with, webcasting our
Yep.
canvas, even with the public being invited, even with our inviting the media to come.
Yep.
So I'm not sure that our electoral system should necessarily only be directed to what the average voter understands about our process. I understand your point. Your point is that if the voters don't understand it, they may not have confidence in it, and there's a whole industry that is going to encourage them not to. But I'm not sure that means that we can only stick to a system that has been the way it's always been done. Simply because of that, because, once again, there's a lot of things that our average voters don't necessarily understand. They probably don't understand that we go over pencil with pen. They probably.
Well, I'm not suggesting
It's
any
just
particular
another
policy course of
component.
action. This board and the county legislature and the general assembly can pick what they want. My point is whatever system is chosen needs to be understandable for someone in an average situation, that they know how the ballot that they cast, how that impacts the results at the end of the day. And what I'm suggesting is the software piece of ranked choice voting is a hiccup for many people.
Ryan, then Keenan.
I just want to, just because it is our software, I just want to emphasize that it is open source. So anybody here or anybody in the world who has internet access can download it. It's on GitHub. You can see every single modification that's made to it, in addition to all the different certification and the testing requirements that it's gone through through federally certified laboratories, so anything like that. So just like the black box aspect of it, obviously to a layman, every piece of software is complicated to that piece of it. But you know, anybody who is really interested in it, you know, it is open source and you can see any aspect of it. And then when it comes to seeing, you know, how a lot of voters want to know how my vote, like, that's what they really want to know, especially if they voted for somebody who was eliminated and like.
Yeah, but
how
if we
that-
can do that, then the vote is
Right.
anonymous.
So well, no, so what I mean in that regard is there are a lot of those, so like, Josh mentioned the RC Viz, seeing those kinds of great tools that can visualize how the results go, not just like numbers on a spreadsheet, are really helpful for voter understanding. And there are organizations like Center for Civic Design that have worked with a number of election jurisdictions to help them design not only the instructions that are on the ballot, but through focus groups and interactions with voters, but also the results displays themselves and what actually helps voters understand who won and why. Yeah, so.
Thank you. Keen.
Okay. There are a lot of great things. I have a question about the campaign side of this. I have a question about the civic engagement community side of this. So starting with the community side of this, voter education, if they are in a position, or rather, if we are in a position where we're thinking about the policies that we are going to create to help mitigate people who make choices of ones down the board, right? Or to another point that you made earlier about someone who might only choose 1, 2, and then later on maybe protests and decides to select the 5th choice and nothing in between. What have been some policy suggestions to mitigate that? So that's my first question. I will direct it to you. Second question is about campaigns. So at the end of the day, we talked about how there might be some equity in play in that when you are having these campaigns, or when you're having campaigns, you're not necessarily doing an all or nothing approach to your constituents or to the constituents, that you are looking to say, I can be your best, or I can be your next best, and still make yourself a player in the game. So keep yourself on the board, so to speak. To that effect, or to that point, I should say, my concern in that space is kind of like block voting. If there are any suggestions you have to help candidates keep that from coming to play, I would love to hear about that. Or if you have any real life examples of that being busted, or just honestly, frankly, just playing out. So I recognize that's a possibility as well.
So like how bullet voting happens in our like at-large races or things like that.
Yes. Those are my 2 questions.
Well, I'll stop real quick. By the way, we have multi-winner at-large elections in our cities, and ranked choice voting reduced bullet voting by like 10x. Because bullet voting is an obvious natural strategy that campaigns in polarized races often promote. And ranked choice voting just makes bullet voting like completely superfluous.
I don't know what that is.
Great question. So bullet voting is where, let's say 3 people are going to be elected at large, and you have 12 candidates, and everybody gets to pick 3 names. So everybody gets to vote 3 times. Well, if I really want to win, and I know that she's pretty popular and she's likely to win, I realize that while we might get along and we're friends, if people vote for her and for me because they're like, well, Josh, everybody's voting for Michelle, but I like you too, so I'll vote for you too. I'm going to tell them, I like Michelle too. She's probably going to win. If you vote for Michelle and not for me, if you vote for Michelle and for me, I might end up pushed down the chain just a little bit. So why don't you just only vote for me and waste your 2 other votes? That's bullet voting. You just vote for 1 person when you could vote for 3. And it's a strategic attempt at a voter trying to make sure that their first choice, in this case me, wins. And they don't really get to then, in that sense, have a second or third choice. But in block plurality voting, where you get to vote for multiple names, this bullet voting effect, it's a strategic attempt by voters to vote strategically. This is one of the upsides of ranked choice voting, is it eliminates the incentive to vote strategically. Because in that scenario, you could just put Josh first place, Michelle second place, Walter third place, and then you're not wasting your votes, and you're not undermining your first choice candidate, Josh, by also voting for Michelle. And so
What's the threshold when you have a multi-candidate race? How do you determine what a majority is?
Depends on the number of seats that you're elected.
Well, in proportional representational models, threshold comes into play because you're dealing with single transferable vote.
Okay, but
In our case, we do sequential majority winner. So we run the process, find the first winner.
So the
Run
first
process.
majority winner.
That's right.
Gets the first seat, the
That's
second
right.
majority
That's
winner gets
right.
the second.
That's
seat.
right.
Okay, I get it.
Yep.
Okay.
Josh, if I might clarify proportional.
Yep.
Yeah, so in proportional representation, it's using the same RCV ballot, but it's not looking for a majority. Because you're looking for, in this case, it's 4 at large, correct? So you're looking for the number of seats plus 1, and then to get the percentage. So then you would do 20% plus 1, because any single candidate that's gonna be elected needs 20% plus 1 vote. And then, because if you have 4 candidates that have 20% plus 1 vote, you have 80% plus 4 votes, and that means it's mathematically impossible for anybody else to reach that threshold of election. And so it's that kind of similar math for depending on the number of seats that you have elected. So the more seats.
But that's also
We
not,
never get for it.
but that's also not what's being, at least thus far, proposed.
It is part of the legislation includes all county level, so the HB 1094.
No, I know it includes all county offices for county council at large race.
County council at large and board of education.
Well,
which could be at
but Board
large.
of Education doesn't have any more multi-candidate races. They have, they're
Oh,
single
right.
seats because of residence districts.
Oh, the at large.
The at large is one at a time.
Oh, it is the
Oh,
one.
like
at-
seat
that's right,
A,
yeah,
seat
yeah,
In,
yeah,
in
yeah.
the, you know.
Yeah.
In the ancient time when
Yeah.
I served on the Board of Education, we
That's right,
had,
I
we
forgot.
had a
They
big countywide
alternate, yeah,
election, but
yeah.
that was a long time ago.
Yeah.
Well, and then
So-
to your question about voter education and, this tendency to vote strategically, the best thing you can always say is you can rank them all and you should. That should be your message. Now, some people criticize that and say, well, people shouldn't be forced to rank them all. It's like, we're not forcing them. But if people understand that you can rank them all, it's the best way to inoculate them against some sort of perception that a 6th place vote is a protest. So they should do first, second, and I hate you, so you're 6th place.
Yeah.
Like, right, this is where is this a mistake or is this a message? If you just encourage voters to rank them all, but you don't have to, and then you get allied organizations in the community to emphasize ranking them all or rank all your favorites. You don't have to rank the ones you don't like. Those types of messages, and there's a lot of best practices and organizations that have tested this messaging, and you should borrow that messaging. And so I think when it comes to voter education, that helps to inoculate people against a misunderstanding about strategic voting. Because like with bullet voting, which is a strategic voting choice by voters, you have voters who think strategic voting is always a part of elections. And ranked choice voting is designed to eliminate that instinct. So then you give them a ranked choice ballot and they still think there's a strategy. So they're trying to come up with the strategy. Some of them misperceive that it's a scoring model. So if I rank you 8th place, somehow that hurts you. And it's like, no, it doesn't. So, so you could get a voter that says, well, I hate them all, but I hate this one the most. So he's my 8th choice. Here's my ballot. And it's like, well, is that a first choice or a protest? Right. And so this is where the policy decision comes in about how you do it. But voter education is an important element. And then
Under your policy of if you skip 2, it's a protest, you
Yeah.
consider the 8th to be that?
that's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, David, you shared all of these links with them, right?
With whom?
With the
boards?
board, yes, with the board or just
No,
boards?
well, the board has them too.
You want me to share this on screen?
Yeah, so I just wanted to show an example. Yeah, thank you. This is, look over more, there's several examples of voter education that I
Okay, yeah,
included.
we don't really have time for that.
No,
right
I
now.
just wanted to say,
But-
like, there's several examples of what a board, what a jurisdiction did to show, like, here's how it works.
And here's how
do
it doesn't work.
Yeah,
As in,
and
if you
like
skip
do-
things, here's what happens.
Yeah, and or explain it in different ways, do videos in multi-languages, all that sort of stuff. So again, we don't have to go into detail about them, but I think looking at those examples really helped understand what you can do in different jurisdictions and kind of think through the possibilities that help with different communities that you're trying to reach. So.
Okay.
Can I comment on the second question?
Yes, yes.
So what we are seeing in our survey of literature and the work that was done at Princeton is that in many cases, ranked choice voting will increase racially polarized voting and increases block structure of block voting. Of course, every voter, every election gets to make their own choice, but that is what we're seeing. And so what that means is it ends up reducing the coalition building that happens across racial groups. And we end up with a situation I was describing at the beginning, which is, again, March Madness. And you end up just by virtue of numbers and definition, you have more majority players on the court than minority, and it ends up punishing the minority voters who are voting as a block. So that's what our survey of the literature is showing. Again, this is a complicated issue, but we think that's a serious concern.
So put another way, a minority group that is united might be able to get the most past the post, so to speak. But if the rest of the voters want to vote against them, they through their second, third, and fourth choices could overcome them.
That's what we're seeing, and what we're seeing is instead of, again, it's the difference between reality and I think the theory too, right? Practice and how voters are reacting to things. Instead of the conversation happening between, I know they are your first choice, let me be your second choice, and that creating a racial coalition among racially polarized voting blocks. We're generally seeing that if there is more than one candidate of the same minority group, that candidate and the person's initial choice will both be of the same minority group, and that continues down the line. And so we're not seeing that crossover voting. That was what we typically see in a normal just plurality election, and what is typically thought of under the Voting Rights Act. So that is what our data is showing in our review of the literature.
Okay, thank you, Diane.
Okay, I'll go back to some pretty simple questions, I believe. What happens with primaries if you have ranked choice voting? And coupled with that, what about party identification of party labels? Because I didn't see any party labels on the sample ballots.
So the sample ballots that I shared with you, just so the first side is labeled the original, so that you know what I was referencing to create the modified version.
This is a primary ballot.
This is the primary ballot. So
Okay,
this is the Republican one, you're a Republican voter, this is what you're getting. That's it. So this is how it would work in the primaries. For the general election, obviously it would be all the candidates, and then you would
what candidates?
So
If you have
that
a
are going to the general.
primary, If you have a primary,
There would
And you
still be
end up-
primary winners, and they would
how
be
many?
the same number as now.
Yeah.
Ranked
You get
choice voting,
one winner.
ranked choice voting does not mean open primary, and it does not mean everybody in the same race, although Alaska had both. Alaska had ranked choice voting and everyone in the same race. But
That's not
ranked,
what we're-
but that's not what we're talking about here. Ranked choice voting is just ranked choice voting.
So you would do the primary election, and in the sample here, you would be choosing a winner for the judge's race or the what are the other options that I have here?
Well, let's take,
Yeah.
let's take US Senate.
Like, I don't think I'm a stupid person, but I'm so confused by this.
Can I give it, can I give it a try?
Yeah.
Let me give it a try. 'Cause-
Then general.
No,
how many
no, I
people
think
are in the
I think I can explain it.
They're the
Let me-
nominees.
Please, let me give it a try.
Yeah.
So let's take the US Senate. Okay, in this example, there look like there's 10 or more people who are running for US Senate. But
In
it's
a primary.
in a primary. You would have ranked choice voting among those 10 or more people. And whoever wins the majority in that primary would be on the general election ballot. Then when you get to the general election ballot, you'd have the Democratic nominee, the Republican nominee, the Green Party nominee, the Libertarian,
New Working,
you know,
whatever that
the
Parties,
Workers'
yeah,
Party,
yeah.
whatever, and you would rank order those people, but it would not be these 10. It would only be one from these 10. It would be the one who won the primary,
Right.
but it would be everybody else who's on the general election ballot. And if there was only two candidates, Democrat and Republican, then there wouldn't be ranked choice voting.
Right. And I'll just say, the way that I set up the sample is because the state legislation is only county level offices, so county executive down. I purposely showed a ballot where you have ranked choice voting at the top for these two offices. And then you're seeing the governor and Senate races, which the bill does not change, because those were a different piece of the changing that for at the state level. So you see all of that on the ballot. Same thing with the Democratic ballot here. And I used for fun, I used the county at large race with the 33 candidates, so we can see how that is working there. But again, you see county executive, county at large are ranked choice voting, and then the House of Delegates is just pick one. Or sorry, vote for three, because that's the way that's done. And state's attorney, since there is only one, it's just showing one. So in both examples, I'm showing you how And it is
Oh,
true,
you
you
would
could
have
have,
mixed ballot.
yes, because
Right.
that's how you can have them on a mixed ballot. Apologies if the design is not perfect to how it would look on there, but just trying to show you, like, this is how it could be on a ballot.
So in the general, you'll have a party label with each candidate.
Correct, yeah. So whoever
So
comes
you
out of
could
the
have-
primary as the winner, it would be, Mark Alworth and then Democrat and then,
So there'll be
Yeah.
one from each of the
Parties, yeah.
parties that are able to make it onto the general.
Correct, yes.
So then what about paper trails and verification? If you have all this calculating going on in a computer system.
So you still have paper
Instead
ballots
of-
and the data of the record. So the way and correct me if I'm wrong, in the way that our ESNS system scans it is that it treats each column there as a scannable piece to identify what that data. So it says first column choice, where is their marking, and saves the data there. Second column choice. And so it saves all of the data of like what's in that ballot. And it's the same way that it actually does the marking for even the vote for one or vote for three that we have here. The way that it's scanning it is to scan that information and determine like, I see this many bubbles filled in or markings, and I'm counting those. And that's how, so the data is stored in that way. We also have paper ballots, and you can see kind of the record of what's happening and through the system in terms of with the calculation of the tabulation round by round, because you can break it down round by round to see here's the total here, here's the number of votes that were transferred to that their second choice was considered because their first choice was eliminated, and so forth.
And
In
these
our,
systems.
in our
as well
experience,
as-
I mean, in our experience, nothing about ranked choice voting changed anything when it came to paper trails, audits, and system logs of what's happening. The only difference is that the log has some additional information, if you will, rather than logging, I scanned the ballot, it was a vote for Biden. I scanned the ballot, it was a first place vote for Biden and a second place vote for Trump, or what have you, right? So when it comes to paper trails and audit logs and all those kinds of things, the systems still perform their normal functions. Ranked choice voting just gives you some additional information, but it's all still there. The additional software tool, the RC tab, also has an audit log, and all of that is saved and produced in compliant ways with all other election systems. So nothing would change really fundamentally with a ranked choice election when it comes to those logs and securities and audit procedures.
Okay. What is the practical experience at the polls for those who use ranked choice voting and still have large numbers of in-person voting? How much longer does it take to vote, implementing this system? And what sort of an educational setup do you have for people who come in and want questions answered before they use this new confusing
So
system?
in our experience for in-person voting, we use a similar system to you all, which is print on demand. So somebody shows up, they check in, they're verified as a voter, they're printed a paper ballot.
Yeah,
at
we
that
don't
moment.
print on demand. We have lots of paper.
Pre-printed ballots. We have that. Either way, they're handed a paper ballot, right? Here's your paper ballot, your pen, your clipboard, go take a seat, vote, right? Voters can take as long or as little time as they want to vote. That's all the same. Will it take?
Well, wait, what do you mean the same? Have you done data analyses of ranked choice voting versus regular?
Well, in our case,
old-fashioned way?
we did, but in our case, because we have paper at the polls, we have virtually unlimited capacity to accommodate people. You know, we would set up, I don't know if you have actual booths or if you have chairs. So like, how many people can you simultaneously accommodate marking their ballot? That's gonna be your question. Because if an
Is it-
individual voter,
Yeah, because wait time will come when you don't have enough space for people. You need people to be able to work their way through the system, and otherwise they have, because I think what you're asking is, are people gonna be waiting in line to vote because someone else is taking their time
Yeah.
trying to figure out who their seventh and eighth
Yeah.
choice is?
Well, and asking somebody,
and to that
they're
question,
gonna get into this thing and they're
Yeah.
gonna go, oh, holy.
Yep, what we trained our
Some
poll workers,
issues.
what we trained our poll workers to do was we gave them additional phrases and ways of thinking about how to explain the instructions. So when a voter comes up and says, what is this grid? It's like, oh, well, the instructions say that you can rank as many, even all of these candidates if you like. You pick your first, second, third choice and so forth. Do you have any questions about that? And the voter might say, well, I only want to rank 2. Well, that's fine. You can rank just 2 if you'd like. People are encouraged to rank them all because it doesn't hurt if you rank them all, but you can just certainly rank all the ones that you like. And so we have those types of phrases that we trained our poll workers to say, so that when a voter comes up and says, I don't understand this ballot, all the poll workers doing is reinterpreting the instructions. But it's important to not have conversations politically, right, with poll workers and.
Yeah, no, I'm not even
But
getting
that's
there.
true.
That's true all the time.
Yeah, right.
Okay, if I can move on to,
Who's gonna be qualified to answer those questions?
well,
Yes.
right, I need to move on to Margie.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So everyone has such good questions and kind of took mine. So, I guess I just have one, there are so many examples of this being implemented in different counties and cities. I just, starting off with voters are most important. I do want to hear how those transitions have been for full-time staff at these different board of elections, just to hear some of the examples, if anyone has any thoughts.
I will share the data from that survey because I think that what the election judges in Minneapolis that have been surveyed after elections, I think that gives some of the indication there. But as I said before, they have not said that it impacted their work where it dramatically changed what they were doing. It was part of what they were participating as a whole. So again, kind of speaks to that it didn't change. They have to obviously with all election administrative staff understand the process and have that time. And I think that speaks to what Walter was saying in terms of making sure that you have a good runway for getting familiar with the system, training folks up, doing the public education, and training staff and anyone else. But when you do that successfully, people are like, yeah, it's just this is part of what we do in our elections. So I think it's similar to how the transition that you all made and the rest of the state made with vote by mail was we had to do it, we had to learn it, we had to train people, we had to get the word out. This is no different. And yes, it takes, when it's new, you have to take more time and you still see repeated issues going on, but you get better at helping to address those issues, working with different communities that have challenges with different things and getting better at it. And that's what I would say is the process. But I'll make sure I did make a note to share that survey data, so.
Anything else? Alex?
This is probably directed to Caleb and maybe to Walter too. You talked about this Princeton University study. How do we know what is a minority ballot? I mean, you can't really know who cast the ballot. So how did you determine that minorities were more likely to have their ballot exhausted or truncated? We don't really know who's casting.
Well, that's a fair point. I mean, look, one of the most important facets of our system, however it looks, is the privacy of the ballot booth. And so what Professor McCarty looked at is he used the same type of information that we use whenever we're looking at Voting Rights Act and protecting minority communities' voting power. So you look at census data, and he also to see where folks are going to live and how they generally vote. And then he also used information from vote records to extrapolate which ones were truncated and which ones were exhausted. So it is true, and we will fully concede that you cannot know for a particular voter what happened. And we also don't think anyone else but that voter should know. But it is very evident from the data that we always use to estimate voters' choices that this is happening. So it's the same processes that we use in other similar situations, we being this broader community.
To have a point of agreement, however rare, between the two of us.
I liked your reason article. I read that.
It is true that there has been so much of an incentive to gather information and make it reasonably robust for use in Voting Rights Act litigation that there are a lot of people who spend a lot of time on trying to come up with things. And I will say, to stop being so agreeable. That, well, no, a lot of us think that the McCarty study was in fact, a version of something that was intended to develop litigation eventually by opponents of ranked choice voting, trying to develop a voting rights act case against it. And where that will head, I don't know, I think it's a legal matter that it's not very strong, but we'll see. I would just urge, for those for whom this is a big stumbling block or point of concern, I would just urge looking at a wider literature, because there is a big literature about RCV and minority voter behavior and minority candidate choices to run for election, and about minority elections. And it's a I think it tells a different story. Certainly in New York City, which admittedly is just as unique as a community can be, but in New York City, you had the political reporters of the whole country looking at the interesting racial dynamics at play in the Adams case. And Adams' success, I wish he had been as successful as a mayor, but Adams' great success in working across racial lines, but pulling in a number of different ethnicities other than his own, and a whole bunch of the white voters as well. In kind of an example of how ranked choice voting is supposed to work. I don't actually want to promise you that more candidates govern the way Mayor Adams is governed, but nonetheless, that kind of coalition politics. Again, New York is a special case, but it was interesting how Adams really did deal with like the Asian community, for example, and reached out to the Hispanic community and found his ally in the white community. So
New York definitely has identifiable communities.
oh yeah, in a way that yeah.
Can I quickly, based on Caleb's question, and I know you've worked on redistricts, and I don't want to bring you back. Has there been an impact in terms of the question of Caleb, well, the concern that you're expressing that this could actually impact minority communities, and whereby we've seen the impact of redistricting on minority communities. Has any of there been there's a correlation between what Caleb is saying to where maybe a district was drawn as a result of?
Well, I will say I think the two issues really are completely separate.
Okay.
There are all sorts of interesting VRA issues about redistricting, but in this case, I think you can leave them aside. We don't have such a full literature that we know for sure what the minority impacts are. I can say in Frederick, where this was much discussed among our city council, our minority representatives on the city council were satisfied that they should join the majority in going ahead for ranked choice voting, that it was protecting and representing the community.
If I could just add that whether you're looking at New York, you're looking at Alaska, you look at San Francisco Bay Area, you'll see in all of those groups that more people of color were able to run and win. We've seen more women run and win. I'll just use the example of New York, where it became the first majority women city council. You do have a very diverse community. I think Caleb noted in his piece that the study is noting potential issues with this, but the reality is if you look at the results and the communities that are coming out of there, you're seeing the representation from those communities. And also, like, Utah is another great example where there's very diverse, the Utah City, Salt Lake City City Council there, diverse groups of folks that were elected that represent different parts of the city, that come from different communities. And it's the first time for some individuals that were elected there. And, that's the goal of ranked choice voting. And it's independent of look at any party. It's saying, how do we make sure that people are getting represented? So I would encourage, and I'll happily share other studies that we've seen on this that are independent studies, and studies that show that when you introduce this to communities, African-American communities and Asian communities, particularly they are of the highest agreement to say that they like ranked choice voting and like the possibilities of it. So, yeah.
Actually, I think it's my turn.
Oh, yeah, well, that.
Yeah. So, first off, I want to say, for the record that I am an alum of Princeton University, and I did reach out to Professor McCarty, did not hear back from him. But I would be very interested to learn more about his study, and other studies.
He's on spring break.
Certainly a possibility. So anyway, one of my questions is, how should anyone decide on how many ranked choices to have? Because you included our 33 candidate race for fun. You only included 6 choices. You know, I look at that list of 33 people, and a lot of them I say, oh, I didn't remember that person ran, and I didn't remember that person ran. But there's a lot of people on this list that I don't know who they are, and I've been active in this stuff since I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, do you have any rule of thumb? And I realize that the county council, if this legislation were to pass, the county council would have to decide, and of course, they're also deciding for themselves.
Yeah.
But do you have any rule of thumb as to what is a reasonable number to rank? Because one of my concerns is that I'm not sure that it's fair to the less involved voter to empower the more involved voter, the one who goes to every political meeting, the one who knows every candidate. To give them that much more say because I'm too busy doing something else that might be very important that doesn't allow me to know 33 people. So I'm not able to rank 33 people. Maybe I can only rank 5. So I guess part of what I want to know is, how do we decide on what those numbers are? And, you know, you all say, well, you don't have to rank, you know, if you want to rank 2, you rank 2.
Yeah.
Okay, no one is forced. No one loses their first choice vote. Your first choice vote counts regardless of how many people you rank or you don't rank. But on the other hand, if I don't know everybody, or you know, first of all, we don't want people to, you know, people will guess. We can tell you from ballots we've looked at, you guys can too. Voters sometimes vote in patterns because they don't know what to do, so they pick people in a row, or they skip each one or whatever. And that's an uninformed vote. So how do we decide how many, and do we think it's a problem if, you know, if some people are able to do more than others?
Yeah, so I know Fairvote did, I can't remember if this is one study we did with them or not, but we looked into ballot usage and the recommendation we came up with it, looking at a number of ballots that were used across the country in ranked choice voting contests, was a minimum of 5 rankings. That's ideally what you want to have. And up to 8 is 5 to 8 is kind of the sweet spot that we tend to find the number of usage in that a voter gets to participate in the top 2, so they get to have a say in who is the ultimate winner. If you're looking at, there's another rule of N+4. This is particularly useful for the multi-winner elections. The number of seats that you're electing +4 rankings. So if it's 3 seats, then having 7 rankings. If it's 5 seats, then 9, that kind of thing. Those are kind of the rules that we would kind of suggest. But there are some places that will rank that give you that option to rank every single person. And there's others that are either limited by the voting system equipment, because there are some that can only rank 3. And so we have some additional resources on we summarize all of that data based on the voting equipment, but in ES&S's case, they can rank up to 21. I have seen a ballot like that. I do not recommend it because that will be expensive for printing costs. So setting some kind of limit would be recommended, especially probably 10 at the most, because that's how much you can fit from left to right on a ballot. And then depending on the number of candidates that you have, but I would say 5 at a minimum, and looking at the N+4 kind of rule.
Especially in a single seat race, I think that you're not going to see any major difference in exhaustion by going up from that 5 to 8 to an 11 or whatever. And people would have to have very specialized tastes to avoid all the most popular people and only want the obscure ones. And those people might wind up exhausting their ballot, but hardly anyone in real life will. You know, in principle, I would say same number of rankings as number of candidates, but I realize that administrability has to count.
David, you've done a really good job of putting this group together because you've identified this argument in the literature, which is awesome. And it's cool for me. I hope you guys too to get to do this live. But so what we look at in this is we suggest ranking at least 1 fewer the number of options. So if there's one person you really hate, don't rank them, but rank everybody else. And the reason is because we are worried about vote exhaustion. That's our view on this. We think vote exhaustion is an important metric. And here's the reason why, very briefly. I'm sure we all saw at least the previews for Conclave, which was a film that just came out. And if you watched it, then you know it was multiple rounds of voting for a pope. And what happened in each of those rounds? Well, the views and the circumstances surrounding the choice changed. And so we have a difference here, which is again, the difference in the literature between, is it important to make, to have one opportunity to make all of your choices without knowing what the head-to-head will be moving on? Or is it important to have an opportunity to make the choice each time for the head-to-head? And Conclave isn't a perfect example, but it does show us why we think vote exhaustion is important, because you're not able to predict if your 6 and your 2 are going to be against each other or something like that, right? And so that's why vote exhaustion is important. It shows that you get to have your active vote exhaustion means you don't get to have your active voice counted at each step of the way versus a more traditional runoff where you would.
Of course, if you have the more traditional runoff, the cost is far greater. And then we would be asking people like you who think that there should, be not the instant runoff, but a more prolonged runoff.
I'm not arguing for the
fun.
more prolonged runoff. I'm just using that as a rhetorical tool to show the difference between the point in time decision and from that why vote exhaustion is important to us.
Right. This has been great. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. I've learned a lot. I hope everyone has learned something. And I really appreciate you all coming in to do this. And maybe someday we'll take this show on the road. But
Or maybe not.
or maybe not. Yeah. Well, I'm sure that we could have easily taken up another hour with all kinds of questions.
No doubt.
But I think I would be impeached at that point. I will point out, I will point out that our bylaws do not have a provision for impeachment. And look how well impeachment has worked out in the past.
Yeah.
So for the impeachers. So anyway, okay, well, thank you all very much. Yes, please make sure to grab some cookies on your way out, because I'm taking home whatever is not eaten. So and if you hang around until the end of our meeting, I'm happy to chat with any of you, but I realize people have other stuff to do. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think we only have about 5 to 10 minutes left in this meeting. Yes, really. Yes. Okay, thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I've been asked to have a 5-minute break. We will take a very brief 5 minutes, no more than a 5-minute break. Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Yeah. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. Public commenters, you will be next. But we're taking a brief break here, and we'll be back shortly.
Happy to connect. More than 50 or 60, not the way that you said. I'm happy to connect with you, especially with ESNF places, like, that'd be
all messed up here.
Oh my God.
And I'll change the speaker
Thank
from
you.
TV to.
I,
so you know, you're unmuted.
okay, I'm unmuted?
Yeah.
Okay, it's time for a public comment period. So Jerry, would you please promote Michael Fletcher and Sheldon Fishman, who are our two commenters? Trying to move things along.
Thank you, David.
Yeah. Do we have any other public comment other than those two?
There were no other.
Okay. Okay, so there is Sheldon, kind of. We're seeing only a portion of you, Sheldon. Can you move to your right?
He's got something covering up his camera.
Yeah, something is covering your camera a little bit, but that's okay. And there's Michael. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Okay, so you guys may have heard my reference to the fact that we don't have impeachment of the board president, but we might have the equivalent if I allow you guys to go beyond your 3 minutes. So because I have been lobbied greatly to try to end our meeting before now. And that's not your fault, and we're interested to hear what you have to say, but we're interested also in finishing our meeting as soon as we can. So that being the case, you each get 3 minutes, and Michael, you signed up first, so you get to go first. And thank you very much.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. Before I provide comments on ranked choice voting, I have to ask, what is the problem with our current system? The recent bills promoted in the Maryland legislature provide no compelling reasons for expending the time and treasure to change the current voting system. The cost from the fiscal and policy notes for the bills for Montgomery County would, they estimate that it would cost Montgomery County $1,100,000 to implement ranked choice voting. And the state would incur $240,000 for ranked choice voting in Montgomery County. So these expenditures are not justified. Also, ranked choice voting forces voters to rank all candidates, even candidates they never heard of, or candidates that are anathema to them. Then the results of these selections are determined by a computer algorithm that generates a winner. Current law requires a voting system to be capable of creating a paper record of all votes cast in order that an audit trail is available in the event of a recount, including a manual recount. The counting methods used in ranked choice voting, I don't believe, would allow the SBE, the State Board of Elections, to certify it, because ranked choice voting counts the ballots more than once, and it would make it impossible or very, very difficult to conduct a post-election audit. Also, ranked choice voting is confusing and leads to voter disenfranchisement. During each round of ballot counting, some voters' choices will fall by the wayside. That was discussed by one of your panelists. Despite spending millions to educate voters on ranked choice voting, New York City in 2021, in their mayoral race, experienced massive chaos and confusion. So many minority voters' ballots were discarded that the head of the New York State NAACP said, quote, ranked choice voting is not beneficial to minorities. It is voter suppression, unquote. Also, ranked choice voting, the process would allow candidates to win without actually securing a majority of the votes. The election winner would then govern without a mandate from the voters. Also, ranked choice voting divorces candidates from the issues. When multiple names on a ballot must be ranked, it's virtually impossible for a voter to know all the platforms of each candidate. Ranked choice voting then becomes a pick a name process. This allows marginal policies to creep into the public, to the body politic. The MIT election lab studied the impact of ranked choice voting in Maine. They found that ranked choice voting produced significantly lower levels of voter confidence, voter satisfaction, and ease of use. It also increased the perception that the voting process was slanted against the respondent's party. Similarly, the researchers found that increasing the amount of time it took to vote by nearly 12 seconds per candidate than voting using a plurality ballot. Although Montgomery County voters are accustomed to waiting for election results, using ranked choice voting to eliminate runoffs does not guarantee faster results in the polling place or in determining the winner.
Michael, I need you to wrap up.
Say again?
I need you to wrap up. Your time has expired.
All right. I would like to ask the board if they've heard back from the State Board of Elections regarding the question about what constitutes a reliable source of information to begin the process to confirm the death of a registrant. As of 10 days ago, I asked Mr. Brajkovic that question, and he had not heard back from the board, from the State Board.
Boris, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fletcher. Yes, that's correct. You did ask. I did respond that I was waiting for the State Board to respond. And that is the still situation. I said, the moment I know, you will know as well. We are State of Maryland. Local boards operate under the State Board of Elections. They have to prescribe the policy that would answer the question of reliable source to remove a voter as on the basis of shown that, right? So we are waiting that policy. Once it's shared with us, that's how we will proceed.
We also have an existing policy. The issue is that we think that they might want to change their existing policy, as I understand it.
The issue is more narrow definition of reliable source based on all the web available obituaries,
right,
that were shared,
right.
Whether they are as previously declared the newspapers or the funeral homes, or if they are archived at certain websites, but initially were published at some newspapers like Washington Post or something.
Right. All I'm saying is that it's not that we're waiting for them to establish a policy in the first impression.
To polish it.
They've already have a policy that does not allow us to rely on sources. We're asking them, can we expand it so that we can rely on some of those web sources that originally appeared in newspapers? And we're waiting for them to, to hear back from them is what I hear you saying.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Sheldon, your turn. 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, members of the board, for your good work. And thank you for the opportunity to address the board about ranked choice voting. My name is Sheldon Fishman, and we have lived in Silver Spring for over 50 years. I've never had any financial interest in ranked choice voting. I am a member of several nonpartisan organizations, including Climate Change Montgomery County and Safe Healthy Playing Fields. But I'm speaking today as an individual, not representing the organizations, but representing my 6 grandchildren. I think ranked, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat anything that was already said about the enormous benefits of ranked choice voting in terms of giving more votes to the voters. But I think one way to think about the confusion issue about this is to think that to say that ranked choice voting is just a tweak on voting rounds. Republican and Democratic presidential conventions in many public and private elections vote using rounds of voting. At the election meeting, if no candidate receives at least 50% of the candidate with the lowest number of votes is removed from the ballot and the assembled vote again. Ranked choice voting simply collects each voter's preference in one ballot and then tabulates those results in voting rounds until a candidate has at least 50% of the vote. I'm happy to share my experience with running ranked choice voting process for the 2018 primary for all candidates on any ballot in Montgomery County. In brief, it ran smoothly. Our voters were positive, and remarkably enough, the candidates, even the losing candidates, were also positive. In brief, it was the only bad news is ranked choice voting is harder for you, the Board of Elections. I'm happy to share, in brief, it was challenging to decide the specific algorithm for tabulating, but it was easy for the voters, and we include several useful transparency features. Thank you very much for your good work. And I return the 43 seconds.
Thank you. Gosh, Sheldon, that was great. Thank you so much. Any questions for either Michael or Sheldon?
Just quickly, where did Mr.
Fishman?
Fishman do?
Yeah, Sheldon, could you explain, when you talked about the 2018 use of ranked choice voting, was that in a private organization you're talking about?
Yes, it was the Montgomery County Green Democrats, which is for all, and it was the Democratic primary. So our voters actually had to choose among 200 candidates.
So what you're saying is that it was part of an endorsement process of that
The endorsement
organization?
process, exactly.
And when you
And-
say 200 candidates, you don't mean 200 candidates for one job.
No,
But what you're
no,
saying is,
the
again,
ballot.
I think what you're saying is that they use ranked choice voting to decide who to endorse in a variety of races across the ballot. Do I understand that correctly?
I'm sorry, say again?
I think what you're saying is that, and I don't remember any of this because I don't think I was part of it, but I think what you're saying is that the organization was using ranked choice voting in order to decide who it was endorsing for a variety of races across the ballot. So when you say
Exactly.
200 candidates, it's not 200 candidates in one race, it's 200 candidates overall.
Yes.
Okay, does that answer your question? Yeah, because I had a similar question.
But that's a lot of
A lot of ranking.
votes to be cast. And
Yes.
of course, they were clustered in some races there would be 3 seats, and some races there'd be just 1 seat.
Sure. Any other questions for Michael or Sheldon? Okay, thank you both very much. It's very much appreciated. We'll see you again soon. Boris, the website update.
Okay, non-election season, our numbers when it comes to website visitors are nothing to compare to what we had in run up to the elections, which is normal. So the numbers are steady across the last 3 months from December, January, February. No major changes. For some very interesting reason that we still don't know why, election inclement weather policy ranked number 2 visited page on our website in the last month. I leave it to our voters for whatever interest that was. But again,
We didn't have any elections in the last 3 months, but I guess our policy was so good that people needed to
I think
see
that
it.
people were just typing inclement weather when the snow came in, and it was just it took them to our website. You know, when the school days were canceled and everything. But because the number of visits was so low, that's why it popped up so high. And that's what few snow days do in Montgomery County. Anyhow,
Okay,
business as usual, as we say,
okay.
on the website.
Any questions about the website? It sounds like it didn't change very much since the last report.
Yeah.
Okay, outreach updates.
So I'll step into Gilberto today.
Okay,
He's not today with us. We mentioned last time that, or at least I tried to repeat today. Montgomery County is an outlier because for us, outreach activities never stop. We started the outreach activities early this year. We continue. You already see here a list of the events that we will attend. We are going to visit schools as a part of our engagement with the school-aged children. And of course, as the spring is coming, all those events at the various locations throughout the county will start to popping up. Again, message for the board is like, if you are aware of some event, please share with us that we can get organized. I don't know if David, you want to say more about March 20th event?
I am.
Because that's an event that David provided an opportunity for us to interact. Anyhow, outreach is ongoing. We are utilizing internal resources, our colleagues from the recruitment and from the water services. Of course, Roberto focuses now on the schools, and then we are going to the communities as the spring days and summer days kick in.
And all I would add about March 20th is that there's an event being sponsored by Montgomery Women, which is a nonpartisan Montgomery County organization. Levante Chapman from them reached out and wanted us to talk about working with the Board of Elections if you're running for office, and working with the Board of Elections if you want to be an election judge. And they invited Boris and me, but that somehow seemed inappropriate, given the name of the organization. So we are inviting Sandy and Michelle and Aisha to talk about those subjects on the 20th. Everyone is invited to attend if you want. I believe that I'm going to have about 30 seconds of introduction.
Same here.
You know, to basically to introduce our illustrious staff members who can actually talk about the details. But and I did see it advertised in other places, so I have no idea how many people will attend, but I was happy that they reached out to us and that we're able to do it.
Now, just for the clarity.
Yeah.
Sandy, Michelle, and Aisha will speak because this is the field that they are covered daily. They will talk because this is what they,
This is their thing.
this is their thing.
Right.
So Aisha will talk about recruitment. I think Michelle will cover candidate filing, and Sandy will cover the registrar supporting people who want to go out and they register other individuals. So
Yes, please, let me clarify. I was not suggesting that we were picking them only because they're women. I was suggesting that the people who work on these issues are women, therefore they should be the ones who speak for themselves rather than Boris and I speaking for them. So anyway, I'm glad that we're able to do that. Anything else on outreach? Okay, is there any new business? Okay, future action items from today. I don't believe we have any. I don't believe we have any. I'm just gonna say, I'd like someone to at least continue the conversation with our guest speaker today from Utah about any options there are for scanning, for duplicating ballots other than the method we use. Because if there is anything that can do it accurately and more quickly, I think we owe it to ourselves and our voters and everybody else to look at it. I'm not suggesting anything specific, just, you know, just a consultation, because he certainly got my attention. It wasn't today's discussion, but I think we all have seen how it would be nice to be able to do that more efficiently if we can. So anyway, okay, approval of the minutes. I submitted some minor changes and I saw a few people who said they were okay with them. Is there a motion?
I move that we accept them as corrected.
Okay.
As edited.
All right, moved by Ami, seconded by Diane. Any discussion? All those in favor, raise your hand. It is unanimous. Okay, future meetings. We have April, May, and June are on our normal schedule, which is the third Monday of the month. Once again, April, drop boxes. May, polling places. June, early voting sites. Now, you may say, if you.
One place changes it.
Well, yes, but I'm saying it, but to the extent that there are any polling, we're not gonna rearrange all the polling places, thankfully.
Verification changes.
But any changes that need to be made from, you know, from the last election. But you may notice that that's on a slightly earlier schedule than we have been in the past. My understanding is that the state is asking for not quite as early a schedule as we are doing, but Boris and I in conversation basically figured that unless we're making major changes, there's really no reason to wait. And so if it turns out that there are major changes, we can cross that bridge when we come to it. But if it turns out that we are going with something similar to what we've done in the past with whatever minor changes, the idea was to get it done as early as possible. And then we have to remember, if we have 14 early voting sites, we have to convince the county council and the county executive to continue with 14 early voting sites. And we have to submit it to the state by their deadline. But the hope is to get all that done now rather than to attempt to squeeze a lot into our later meetings. Remember, we are not having a July meeting. We are having an August, first Monday in August meeting that is roughly the halfway point between the June meeting and the September meeting. Any questions about our meeting schedule? Anything else for the good of the order?
I was also interested in what Mr. Daniel was saying about how I don't think they hand canvass every mail-in ballot.
No, they
No, they
clearly do
absolutely
not.
don't.
They
I mean,
said-
that would be a
They
radical change.
scan it. I thought that's what you were referring to.
No, no, no,
No,
no,
no,
no,
he said,
no.
he said he scanned the,
You're talking about the web delivery.
I'm talking about the duplication of ballots.
yeah. the
He
web-
said that he has electronic means of duplicating those ballots, but he also has electronic means of people sending their ballots in.
Yes.
And that's
printed
something,
on ballot style paper. Basically, there's nothing. You just print the ballot style paper. That's what he said, ballot size.
so
But
you're
they
so you're
said-
saying that what would happen is the voter could be overseas somewhere. They can work on it on their computer and then send it to us, and it's already on ballot style paper.
No,
We send it,
they
and then
send
we
it
can print
in
it.
He
electronic.
printed.
We print it onto ballot paper.
That is correct.
That's what, how I understood what they were doing in Utah.
Yeah,
Okay,
That's
they
speed.
send in
Alright.
their ballot electronically.
okay.
And
then
I
it's
don't think we're prepared to do that yet.
Well, we're not legally authorized to do that
Yeah.
yet.
We don't have the money for the
But,
machine.
but I would say that I think there were other things that he said that were potentially of use to us that were short of that, which was the duplication. I don't know whether he has a better system than we do or not. I'm always willing to hear what other
Yeah.
people have to say.
Sure, outside of ranked choice, just. for-
No, it had nothing to do with ranked choice.
Right.
And I will reiterate, we have no decision power here. The goal of this conversation was for us to be better informed. That was the whole, that was.
It's
the
a
whole-
generate change.
And to
if
think
necessary.
about its implications for us,
Yes.
if any.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll find out whether, what the legislature decides to do, but I think we are that much better informed than we were before.
Oh, yeah.
So
I feel
anyway,
much better.
thank you all for meeting here in person. This meeting is now officially adjourned.
Okay.
So nice seeing
Okay.
everybody.
Likewise. Thank you, Kevin.
I just told you.
See you, Kevin.
Thanks and congratulations, Kevin.
Aaron Gopra.
Yeah.